In the middle of a devastated plain, a man stands without a shadow of fear or doubt, destroying humanoid monsters that attack in droves, trying to inflict at least one blow on him. With one magical attack, he pierced all the surrounding humanoids, leaving behind only corpses, but new enemies were already waiting ahead. Bewildered by the strength of the unknown, the army of monsters exclaimed, asking who this pathetic little man was. This man was Trowman, the strongest master of humanity of the 9 stars, the apostle of justice, fighting the evil of this world. People like him, having realized all their dreams, begin to help the rest of the world, not for reward or glory, but for the sake of honor and justice. The monsters fell silent as they saw a huge magic circle in the sky overhead, appearing as an omen of the destructive spell that Lucas was preparing, looking down on them. The huge spell killed every single humanoid, turning the battlefield into a crater, scattering rocks and corpses across the plain. Suddenly, Lucas heard a voice pierce directly into his consciousness, warning him that he had taken on too much, and a bright flash illuminated the battlefield. The light from the flash disappeared, and revealing his invincible essence, the demigod appeared before the hero and told him that he could no longer look at the violations of the orders and laws of the world. Lucas's abilities are more developed than those of other people, but for the gods, a person will always remain only a person who is forbidden to disturb the peace of the universe. Arms wrapped around the hero, blocking the concentration of mana, sealed his consciousness and made him feel that no one could resist God. For this deadly sin, he plunged into the abyss of impenetrable darkness, in which endless suffering and emptiness awaited him, forcing him to doubt his existence. The life of the 3rd son of the Blake family consists of daily beatings and bullying from his classmates. For his weakness and mediocrity, he is considered only incompetent trash. As the academy's most useless student, he can't fight back while his bullies beat him to a pulp and wonder why he continues to live. His partner in magical studies, an arrogant and vindictive guy, promises not to overdo it and teach him a lesson that he will remember for the rest of his life. Having coughed up blood and left alone with himself, he gathers his will into a fist and utters a sincere desire to become strong, which is heard not only by him. Trowman opened his eyes and again saw the space so familiar to him for such a long time when he heard the words of the crying boy about the desire for power. Having spent thousands of years in this place, it broke his body and mind, so the cry for strength seemed like another hallucination to him, because it is easy for those imprisoned in this place to go crazy. In despair among the mountains of corpses, Lucas cried out to God in search of an answer to what real fear was. He kept hearing a pleading voice and began to guess that this alien consciousness was talking to him, blaming himself for weakness and helplessness. Blake family? His own father disappears from the family and his life because he only undermines the authority of the family with his mediocrity. Pointless objections that weakness is not a sin do not work on his father, who does not even acknowledge the existence of his own son, driving Frey to a breakdown. Having stolen sleeping pills from the infirmary, he thinks about ending this senseless farce that his life represents, and Lucas feels all Frey's experiences. Lucas hears the voice of a demigod and stops holding back his emotions, denying the imaginary order of the world and the absurd laws that force innocent people like Frey Blake to die. His eyes lit up with a desire for revenge, a desire to live. He promises the demigod to make him experience such a life. And at the moment of the boy's death, he sees a strange light. Frey's consciousness entered Lucas's body, freeing him from the 1,000-year seals. Before he could see the world, before he could push off with both feet and fly as high as he could, Frey commits suicide. Lucas, 4,000 years later, is reborn in the body of the weakest man on Earth, making him the most powerful magician in the world. Having gained freedom after a long imprisonment, he promises to take revenge on the one who calls himself the god of this unjust world. To replenish some of his strength, Lucas trains in magic every night, but with Frey's body, he cannot properly control mana. Freed from the seals that have held him back for 4,000 years and vowing revenge, he lays the foundation for mana in a new body. In one night, Frey reached the level of 5 stars, half of his original strength that he had before his imprisonment. Frey's body couldn't handle the strain, So he vomited out all the toxins that had accumulated in his body and mind. Everyone at the academy couldn't wait for the magic matches. David couldn't wait to smash Frey to smithereens. While David was arguing with Jack, Frey released the toxins accumulated throughout his life from his body. Arriving at the West Road Academy cafeteria, Lucas gained strength in his new body, devouring portion after portion of food, causing surprise on the faces of the students around him. Although all the students seem like small children to Frey, he decides to understand the world order anew, concerned only with revenge on the demigods. Having abandoned all thoughts of revenge for a while, he enters the class, catching the shocking glances of his classmates. But the road to his seat in the audience is blocked by David, the offender of the former Frey. Jack has lost a bet with David about whether Frey will dare come to class, and suddenly turns to him to repay his lost food stamps. Jack grabs Frey, and he notices that he is shaking for no reason. This gives him the understanding that Jack, like David, was the very bully who forced Frey to commit suicide. Jack is about to hit Frey, but he manages to dodge in such a short time that no one in the class understood how he did it. Almost being hit again, Frey creates a ball of compressed air and launches it at Jack, who is sent flying into the opposite wall and passes out, bleeding from the force of the blow. Everyone in the class couldn't believe their eyes when they saw the weakest student standing over the unconscious Jack. At this moment, Professor Dio appears in the class, who notices traces of strange manner on Jack and realizes that the one who did this is stronger than all the professors at the academy. Professor Kevin replaced Dio and began teaching the lesson, saying that he had gone to look after Jack and asked not to worry about this incident. Kevin is a pervert who only cares about girls during class, but when he noticed Frey, he couldn't help but wonder why Frey showed up to class. Frey responded with a request that Kevin not bother him with his unimportant lesson, expressing outright disrespect, which caused wrinkles to appear on Kevin's forehead. Kevin decided to teach the arrogant cadet a lesson and asked him to answer 3 questions, the first of which was about what were the 3 main weapons of the evil warrior king Kasajin, which made Frey momentarily lose concentration from what he heard. Hearing a familiar name, Frey plunged into memories from his past life about a friend of his youth who was a warrior mage. By concentrating mana throughout his body, he could level a mountain with one attack without even getting tired. At that time, more than 4,000 years ago, they often saw each other like old friends, but even when they met, Kasajin preferred not to stop training. Lucas started talking about how Kasajin would never marry, but he replied that men should be impartial towards women. Forgetting about the professor's question, Frey finished being nostalgic and heard exclamations from students that such questions were not in the textbook. While everyone could only whisper about the injustice, Frey was about to answer, but he was interrupted by a student from the back of the class. Her name was Isabel, and for her beautiful appearance she had a military voice and a strange way of speaking. Professor Kelvin says that although Kasajin was a warrior, he used mana for training and invites her to continue the discussion in his office alone. Having stopped silently observing, Frey stops the harassment with his answer, which sounded like thunder in broad daylight. Everyone in the audience fell silent after Frey's words. He even began to doubt the reliability of his memories, but Professor Kelvin said that the answer was correct. Everyone was surprised at the strange changes in Frey's behavior, but Kelvin, showing his true nature, did not stop harassing Isabel, insisting on privacy in his office. Frey could not look at this calmly and started talking about how, according to Kasajin, when approaching a girl, a man must be as adamant as a rock, and those who do not fail in this are no better than animals. With his words, Frey seriously angered the professor, and he reminded him that he shouldn't go crazy after one correct answer. Throughout the lesson, the class could only watch in bewilderment, as recently the worst student at the academy correctly answered all the questions about the history of the Age of Light. Since it's time for lunch and Frey is very hungry, he forces the professor to interrupt the pointless interrogation, allowing himself to get away with it and leave Kelvin in the cold. On the way to lunch, Freya is pursued by Isabel, whom he saved from being harassed by the professor in class, and he cannot force her to take a different path. Having helped himself to a full table of food, Frey learns from Isabel that his era is now called the Era of the 4 Greatest Men, one of whom is Lucas Trowman. He understands that over these 4,000 years, Magical development has only degraded, suggesting that the demigods are the culprits. After finishing speaking in her strange way of speaking, Isabel added that Trowman was her grandfather's idol, and she would marry him if he were alive. Everyone was casting envious glances at the weakest student at the academy, and Isabel chatting together in the cafeteria, and when David saw them, he only became angrier at Frey. Isabel inquired about his strange answer to the teacher's question about the directions of the sage Shuhei, since only 2 directions were known before, and Frey mentioned that there was a third, hitherto unknown. Without answering the girl's question about the third direction, he finished his food and left, saying that he is strong in practice, not in theory, so she should read books about it and not ask him. After lunch, the long-awaited one-on-one magical battles began, which David was most looking forward to, because he couldn't wait to teach Frey a lesson. He didn't understand why Frey was sitting with one of the best students, and this angered him more and more. But Frey did not pay attention to either the girl next to him or David's angry glances. His mind was captured by the beautiful girl teacher, who was telling the rules of duels, while Frey drooled over the teacher and insisted that this was the perfect female beauty. Isabel realized that he had a fetish for older women, and the first fight began. The first magic match will take place between David, who has 3 stars, and Frey, now the weakest student at the academy. Both opponents entered the arena, but Frey walked past David straight to the beautiful teacher, flirting with her, and received from her a promise to have dinner together if he won the fight. Frey left the woman who could barely stand on her feet and headed towards his opponent, pleased with the outcome of the dialogue and the fact that it was not in vain that he awakened in this world. Returning to the arena, Frey looks at David, who doubts the adequacy of his opponent and promises to tear out his vocal cords, crush his limbs one by one, and says that this will be his last day. The fight began. The students were screaming and cheering for David, who was clearly the favorite in this match, so he didn't bother with strategy for long. David first began to cast the Stone Rage spell, which is a generic technique, and was initially forbidden to be used at the tournament, shocking all the students and teachers of the academy. After exchanging a couple of angry phrases with each other, David and Frey prepared to attack, but Frey's spell surprised everyone present with a strange light, making it clear that it was a magic missile. But one shot of this strange spell shattered David's Stone Rage into crumbs, striking him too. All the stands could only stand silently in numbness at what had happened, while David barely restrained himself from losing consciousness. Frey's attack hit David in the neck and deprived him of his voice, but he was not going to stop there and began to remember what David had promised to do to him, creating a new magical missile to attack. David felt the full weight of the role of the victim, starting to ask for mercy, but without a voice he could not utter a word, and Frey's attack broke his right leg with a crunch. The fight turned into a one-sided beating, and Isabel asked the teacher to stop the battle, but according to the rules, this could not be done now, because gaining experience in battles is the true path of a master of magic. Frey arrogantly glared at the mute David, saying that the world of magic is getting worse thanks to people like him. David was ready out of fear to lose the last particles of his battered consciousness, but Frey reports that all his words were just a joke and promises him that he will not break anything except his legs. At the sight of the newly created magic missile in Frey's hands, David faints in fear in the middle of the arena, and this ends their fight. The 2 senior students watched their fight all this time. After Frey's victory, they exchanged glances with each other and, confirming Blake's victory, went back to the academy. The next day, rumors of Frey's incredible victory spread throughout the academy, and now, when he simply walks through the corridors, people look at him with undisguised surprise and shock. In the middle of the break, Frey was stopped by his sunbae, 4th-year Dooman Milost, who invites him to join the Trowman Brotherhood. Not every student gets the chance to join this fraternity, because the worthy ones are chosen by the participants themselves, representing the academy. Remembering that now he is not Lucas Trowman, but Frey, he refuses to join the fraternity, stupefying Dooman, who was about to continue persuasion, but was stopped by another senior student. Dooman bowed to the senior student, who introduced himself as Pierre June. Having calmed Dooman, the head of the Brotherhood appears before Frey with the same offer of membership, But Frey remained adamant even in front of such a famous person as Pierre June, and brazenly refused even to him. Meanwhile, Frey went to the promised dinner with a beautiful teacher who could not resist. Their romantic dinner was hosted by Isabel, who sat next to Frey at the table, eating calmly. The conversation turned to combat, one of Kasajin's methods of training, and the professor could not find information on it. Instead of telling them about the battle, Frey decided to seduce the professor by talking about continuing after dinner in her room. Shocked by these actions, Isabel knocks on the table and interrupts their cooing. After the failed dinner, Frey stands on the embankment and thinks about how the information about him and the three great magicians remained unchanged. Isabel interrupts his thoughts, and Frey asks her who the most powerful magician in the academy is, and he learns that her aunt Cirris Trisnane, the strongest in the academy, has 6 stars. Frey notices the professor, and he learns that at the moment there are no more than 10 magicians with 8 stars all over the world, and 9 stars can be considered a walking legend. Cirris can tell him about this, but for this he will need to pump up his power to the level of 7 stars. Not believing that the boy can reach such a level, the professor is again seduced by him, but they are again interrupted by Isabel. 2 weeks later, David returns to school, and as he walks down the corridor on crutches, curses Frey and what he dared to do to him. Entering the classroom, David sees Frey sitting calmly in his seat and begins to promise him that he will gather all his friends for revenge, but his speech is interrupted by a flying magic missile. The lesson continued when the teacher announced that Cadet David had to go home to have the bridge of his nose put back in place. After class, Frey walked calmly across the campus, but he was stopped by senior student Alex Dreamid, a friend of David, who took him away. Alex took Frey into the school basement, where there was a group of hooligans ready to attack him at any moment, and threatened him with violence. Alex ended his threats by catching the magic missile with his body, because Lucas could not tolerate humiliation, even in his young body. A crowd of hooligans shouted about how Frey dared to attack their leader, but each of them fell silent when a magic missile flew at him. Having scattered everyone in the room with the help of magic missiles, Frey realizes that if he continues to fight with weaklings like them, he will soon become just as weak. After the fight, he was resting in class. Isabel disturbed him and told him that due to his frequent use of a magic rocket, he was nicknamed the Death Rocket, driving him into the face. Isabel said that by mixing troll blood with magical water, she got good results and asked Frey to continue teaching her. Frey didn't fully understand how he became her teacher, but he couldn't help but think about her potential, which could be developed to 8 stars. He told her that he was going on a deadly training session during the holidays, and if she went with him, she would be able to see the battle with her own eyes, to which she immediately agreed. The next day they met on the street before going on a hike, but Isabel took with her a huge backpack of things, which was twice the size of herself, because girls need a lot of things. Isabel asked about the place of their destination, and it turned out to be the mountains of Spain, such a dangerous place in the world that it was called a paradise for monsters. But it took a very long time to get to it, even by teleport. Even if they teleported from Hispaniola, it would take more than a quarter of a day, and they would encounter the most dangerous monsters along the way. Isabel added that the teleporter was quite expensive and cost about 10 gold, and Frey immediately remembered that he only had 1 gold. He asked Isabel about the money, and she replied that she did not take a single coin because a rich life makes people lazy. After finishing talking about money, they went to the port to board a ship that was free for academy students, and saw a huge ship in the port. Having waited their turn, they learned that the ship was completely full, and they had to wait another 4 days or go to the more unsafe ship Corteggio. Disappointed with the proposed alternative, they learned from the port cook that Corteggio is sailing to Xiaotangbul and will arrive in Kausimponi only in 5 days, and they agree to board the ship. At the same time, in another part of the sea, a pirate ship was preparing to raid a ship sailing into Xiaotangbul. Frey and Isabel, meanwhile, meet the ship's captain, Mac Martins, unaware that a serious threat is approaching them. They learn that Corteggio is sailing past the Oscar Islands, known for pirates, and that the ship is guarded by 2 warships, each containing a 4-star magician. Having made sure that their journey is safe, Frey and Isabel are about to rest, when suddenly a scream is heard on the deck of Corteggio. Captain Mac hears from his sailors that the warships have been sunk, and the entire crew sees a large pirate ship in the distance, sailing towards them. A minute earlier, on the pirate ship, everyone except the captain was worried that Cortezio had 2 warships. The captain of the pirate ship was not worried because he could hardly invite the Lich to the ship Dulara, who is a high-ranking undead and mage. Dulla conjured a spell summoning 3 ice spears, sinking a convoy of warships escorting Cortezio. The spell struck the warships, but the 3rd ice spear moved out of its trajectory into the sea, and Dulla began to worry that someone strong was on the ship. Frey and Isabel watched what was happening. Everyone began to panic and hide from the attack. Isabel also began to worry. Frey noticed that the spell did not reach its target, and told Isabel that it was not he who prevented it, and could not stop the approaching spell, although he felt a wave of mana. He remembered how he lost to the demigod in Lucas's body, but returned to himself and analyzed the mana of the spell, realizing that it was the mana of the undead. The pirate ship overtook Cortezio, and the pirates boarded the ship, taking all the students of the academy captive. The bloody marauders announced the capture of the ship, their entire crew screaming from the enormous spoils, while Cortezio burned. However, many chose to confront the pirates, and the captain of the bloody marauders threw a knife at one of these students, which nailed him to the wall. Frey noted that this knife would have killed the cadet, but the unknown person deviated the trajectory, and he notices the guy walking directly towards the pirates. The pirate captain was ridiculed for his mistake and decided to take it out on another student, who, out of fear, relieved himself in his pants, and the pirate decided to throw him overboard. This student was an orc from 2nd grade. His friends decided to join the fight after their friend was brutally killed and began an attack. But each of their magical attacks was dispelled by the shield that the Lich made Dulla, arriving on the ship and shocking everyone except Frey. Isabel clung to Frey when she saw Dulla and wanted to know how they would get out of such a dangerous situation alive. The Lich, whose minimum power is 5 stars, called on the one who stopped his spell to come out and make a new one, promising to kill everyone. This person turned out to be Pierre June, the head of the Brotherhood from the academy. All the students on the ship were shocked by this, including Frey. Pierre June was one of the best students at West Road Academy, a scion of one of the 3 most influential families. Everyone hoped that they were saved, but only Frey knew that Pierre could not cope in this situation, because he was already at the end of his strength, having spent almost all his mana on restraining the first Lich spell. Pierre already regretted boarding this ship, wanting to rid himself of unnecessary attention from the academy. The Lich read Pierre's thoughts and arrogantly told him that with his help he would find excellent material. He learns that the pirates' goal is to capture everyone on Cortezio and receive a ransom for them, and invites the captain to take only himself, because the June family will pay a lot of money for him. Dulla is on his side, but Pierre does not give up and says that by fighting he will be able to take them with him to the grave. Dulla did not like Pierre's boasting, and he captures him, saying that he already belongs to him, and the pirates take everyone else prisoner. One of the pirates targeted Isabel and demanded that Frey give her up, but he responded by asking him to be more polite to his elders. Frey attacks him first, overtaking the enemy with a blow enhanced by mana in a split second, and the pirate flies behind the ship. After that, he patted Isabel, who was standing next to him, on the head, saying that the enemy was much stronger and he could not do otherwise, driving her into the face. Frey did not stop and began to shut up all the pirates, accelerating with the help of mana and striking at the opponent's weak areas. The pirates attacked him in droves, but he fought them off only with magical attacks, surprising all the academy students on the ship. Frey decided not to waste time on trifles, and began to cast a big spell that struck almost all the pirates at once. The pirate who evaded the spell grabbed Isabel and threatened Frey to kill her, but Isabel cast a short spell and struck the enemy with lightning, managing to fend for herself. The pirate captain mistook Frey for a guard hiding among the students, and put forward a proposal to him, because it would be difficult for him to deal with all the bloody marauders on Cortezio. It was that the pirates would leave half of all the students, so Frey would remain a hero and save half. The students began offering money to Frey in exchange for him taking them with him, and he started an auction, enraging Isabel. Frey got angry and said that a magician is someone who protects the weak and does not care only about his pathetic little soul, but asked them to think again about the reward, taking Isabel by surprise. Dulla saw him as a valuable specimen but unable to defeat him, so he entered combat mode and asked Frey to die. Dulla launched a spell of 3 homing spikes that would chase the enemy, and Frey had to dodge. The Lich did not wait for the spell to overtake the enemy, so he attacked with the cursed right hand, and Frey was unable to dodge 2 spells at once. When the remnants of the Lich's mana dissipated, Frey was nowhere to be seen, but suddenly his own spikes began to fly at Dulla. While Dulla was trying to figure out why the spell was attacking him, Frey suddenly appeared behind him and moved in his blind spot until the Lich flew into the air. Isabel looked at Frey with relief, and when he looked back at her, it seemed to her that the greatest magician in history, Trowman, was standing in front of her. Meanwhile, the Lich decided to sink the entire ship with a spell of ice spears, fearing an unknown enemy, but Frey's barrier repelled the spears. Dulla could no longer endure the unimaginable defeats and created a huge ice spear, twice the size of the ship, and launched it, but Frey pierced right through it. Seeing the healthy and unharmed Frey in front of him, Dulla could not tolerate the fact that the 5th star youth could calmly confront him. Frey asked not to disappoint him in a good battle and told the Lich that he was Trowman, who returned to this world after 4,000 years. But his speech did not reach Cortezio. Frey got tired of playing with Dulla and found himself behind him again, but this time he pierced him right through with his hand and pulled out the machine of life, crushing it in his palm, after which the Lich disappeared. Frey finished dealing with the Lich and appeared behind the pirate captain, telling him that the joke negotiations were over. It didn't take him long, so he finished the cleanup quickly, and there was no one left on the ship except its passengers. Frey and Isabel disembarked from the ship, and Pierre June approached them and thanked Frey for saving their lives. Walking down the street, they talked about how Frey had recently been the most mediocre student at West Road Academy, but now he was able to deal with the Lich, who was beyond the power of even the royal magicians. Pierre was shocked for a second by Frey's words that different things happen to people, but then invited him to look into his clan. Frey replies that he will look if he has time, and Isabel began to scold him about his disrespectful attitude towards the June clan, but Frey remembered that they lacked money and asked Pierre for 20 gold pieces. Isabel began to scold him again, but Pierre only asked what they needed the money for, and having learned that they needed to use the teleporter, gave them 300 gold pieces as a reward. Pierre tells them that he is getting married soon, and Frey asks if he has a sister, incurring Isabel's wrath, but to his disappointment, she is from another kingdom. They say goodbye on the bridge, and Pierre again asks Frey to come to his clan so as not to look ungrateful, but Frey again refuses him. Finishing their meeting, they separate, and Isabel throws out all her anger for Frey's dishonest actions on him. The next day, the two of them went shopping for hiking clothes. Isabel tried on different beautiful outfits, but Frey told her that when hiking, it is better to take light clothes that can be changed quickly. They ended up buying clothes for the trip, and a pocket pouch that could hold items much larger than it. As they walked along a street filled with people, Frey noticed that the level of amenities had not changed much in the 4,000 years of his absence, and realized that it was the demigod who had interfered with the development of humanity. While Frey was trying to figure out the reason why the demigod was interfering with humanity, he and Isabel arrived at the teleport site. The two of them walked up to the teleportation circle. The man at the counter announced that the stones had begun to fill with mana, and Frey warned Isabel that those who were not used to it might vomit. The teleport ended, and they found themselves near the Spain mountains, but while Frey was nostalgic for a familiar place, Isabel vomited. Isabel said it was because she hadn't eaten anything since the morning, so she and Frey went to a local tavern. Frey ordered a portion of meat for 5 and a glass of beer, which made Isabel shocked because alcohol was prohibited for minors, but Frey replied that in his time, everyone drank from the age of 13. When they sat down at the table, the owner of the tavern began to talk to them, warning about the danger of the mountains of Spain, and added that such children wouldn't survive there and they needed to get out of here back. He said that his son died in the mountains of Spain as a mercenary, but Frey was not embarrassed by this, so he asked to talk about the monsters here. The seller asks them to return alive and lets them go, saying that they will pay the next time they meet. Frey and Isabel went to the mountains of Spain, and monsters were waiting for them at the entrance, with whom the two of them fought in a dark forest. Isabel was exhausted from fighting such strong monsters and said that this place was too dangerous, but Frey reminded her that he was going to Shuhei's dungeon. They say that in the legendary dungeon of Shuhei, you can find great power with which you can rule the whole world. Isabel said this, and Frey plunged into his memories. In his youth, when he was in the body of Lucas, he heard words from Shuhei that he would wait for him on a high mountain, rising above the clouds, on a small island in the lake, at the top of that mountain. Frey returned to reality and told Isabel that this is a real legend, but to get to this place infested with the most dangerous monsters, you need to have 6 stars, which will take a whole month of training. Isabel objected to him that it would take them several decades to reach such a level, even with all their strength. But Frey told her to look for a place to concentrate the mana, and they continued to fight. Having finished fighting, they found a place that was located in a cave under a waterfall, hidden from the prying eyes of researchers. Frey said that they would train here for a month, and also began to show Kasajin's method of training the battle, asking Isabel not to repeat it, because she might die. Frey began to absorb mana from all over Mount Spain, and Isabel, who was watching this, decided to ignore the warnings and repeat it, and Frey realized that Isabel had great potential hidden within her. When they finished, Isabel saw the grinning face of a young guy in front of her, who said that she was very good, and blushed at his words. Frey took out the dried meat and gave it to Isabel, saying that even if she was full, she needed to eat, because now there was a lot of mana flowing through her. During the meal, Isabel commented that Frey was acting strangely, as if he already knew where to go and what to do. They would train for a whole month in this narrow cave, just the two of them, and the realization of this made Isabel flush and scream, but Frey said that he was not interested in youngsters like her. Feeling uncomfortable and wanting to punch Frey, Isabel falls asleep after he sets up a protective barrier against the monsters. Saying that he slept for about 5 hours, Frey announces the start of Kasajin's real battle training and reminds Isabel to just watch and not try to repeat it, because it could kill her. Isabel sat down in front of him and began to watch as Frey collected the mana accumulated in his body and divided it into fire and water. It is as if a war has begun in his body. The mana is in conflict with itself, while maintaining the equality of the opposing sides, as if adjusting the scales so that there is no advantage. Watching Frey in surprise, Isabel realized what Kasajin's real battle was like and decided to try to repeat it. Isabel concentrated the mana and divided it, but was unable to adjust and maintain the balance, causing her to cough up blood and fall to the floor, looking at Frey, who was sitting as if he was meditating. 2 weeks have already passed. They have been training all this time in a narrow cave, now filled with mana. During these 2 weeks, Frey did not move even once as he began to materialize mana emanating from his body, reaching 6 stars. Isabel couldn't sit on the sidelines and just watch, so she constantly concentrated and repeated Kasajin's training, advancing in her magical development. As soon as she lost concentration for a moment, the entire balance collapsed, and she received a strong impact on her body, because this is a completely different level of magic. During another such breakdown, Isabel noticed that the barrier began to collapse, and the phoenix, a divine monster, frightening people with its very appearance, entered the cave. Frey interrupted his training and decided to pay attention to the phoenix. He realized that the monster had come to them thanks to a huge amount of uncontrolled mana, and decided that he needed to tame it. Isabel was surprised that a man could so calmly approach the divine monster and stroke the phoenix's plumage, because it consists of flashes of flame. Frey showed Isabel the wounds on Phoenix's body that almost touched his heart, so the fact that he managed to reach them and survive was already a huge miracle. Frey also said that after death, phoenixes are freed, but they are not immortal, so the two of them could only guess about who could inflict such wounds on the deity. Guessing that Frey could help him, Phoenix came to him after he was unable to cope with a strong opponent. Thanks to Frey reaching a new level in 2 weeks of training, he realized that he could heal this injured phoenix. Isabel looked at him from a different angle, because now Frey had become softer and being with him more comfortable, and at that time memories came flooding back to him when he met Phoenix with Lucas. Infusing his mana, Frey slowly healed the phoenix's wounds, and he opened his wings again, while Isabel wondered if it was possible to achieve immortality with such healing magic. Frey tells Phoenix that when he gets stronger they will fight, and he flies away, leaving behind a feather, after which Frey returns to training. Their training had been going on for 4 weeks, and during this time Far had no further interruptions, causing him to lose weight, causing Isabel to worry about his condition. Isabel thinks about him that Frey combines great knowledge of history and magical power at her young age, but she can only accept this and continue on their path. Frey woke up from his training and felt the familiar power of the 6th star. Now he could collect mana simply by breathing. Isabel thought that this would be a sensation. Frey was able to stand for a couple of seconds and suddenly felt that his body was completely empty and needed recharging after many weeks of fasting, so Isabel helps him and offers him jerky. Due to exhaustion, they leave the cave to hunt, but see that there are many monster corpses near the waterfall next to the cave, meaning that Phoenix was guarding them all along for healing him. There is no longer any need to hunt. They can cook monster meat and go to Shuhei's dungeon, but they are interrupted by a loud scream coming from the forest nearby. Frey also heard this cry and decided to check what happened there, so he concentrated mana in his legs and jumped with all his might and left Isabel alone among the corpses. In the forest he went to, there were many human corpses. A tied man was hanging on a tree, screaming in fear while the robbers threw knives at him in turn. After another miss, Juan's turn came. He swung and threw the dagger straight at his head, but it bounced off the air in front of his face and fell, and everyone standing nearby laughed at him. Turning around, one of the robbers noticed Frey standing nearby, and he, seeing this strange game of throwing darts from the side, regarded them as bad guys who should be eliminated. On him, preparing to strike back with their daggers, but their heads flew off their shoulders first. Seeing how something cut off the heads of 2 of his charges, the captain realized that it was magic of the 5th level of the Line of Light, which means that standing in front of them is one of the strongest magicians in the entire kingdom. Isabel caught up with Frey when it was all over and saw the corpses of the robbers and their leader, whose life he saved for interrogation. He stood in the middle of all this carnage and wondered if the demigod really liked to see people kill, liked to see the regression of humanity, and he again promised himself to take revenge on the demigod. Frey heard that the man tied to the tree as a target asked to be saved because he needed to apologize to his father. One of the robbers managed to escape, and coming to the head of their gang, Captain Karlst, he said that the entire 3rd platoon had been captured and destroyed by one man who skillfully wielded magic. Karlst and his wards could not understand who this magician was and who hired him against them, so he ordered his subordinates to strengthen the defense of their grouping site, and at his first appearance, to launch an attack so as not to miss him close to them. Some time later, in the same mountains, Karlst and his bandits attacked a carriage with horses in which Sonia Aquarid, the eldest daughter of a family of famous knights, was riding, and defeated all her accompanying people. Proving her title as the Fire Sword of the Kingdom of Ruanoble, she continued to fight her enemies, but as soon as she attacked Karlst, his guard entered the fight and drove the exhausted Sonia back. Sonia Aquarid possessed a talent beyond that of her family, and for her merits received the title of Rainfall at the age of 18. Despite all this, Sonia's thoughts now were only about how she could defeat the crowd of strong robbers when only she could fight. Karlst understood the situation in which Sonia was, and said that he would not kill her right away, but would have fun with her, and if she refused and killed herself, then they would have fun with the girls from the temple that remained from her group. Sonia decides that she has no way out of this situation, and tries to sacrifice herself, but the girls from the temple ask her to kill them with her own hand so as not to desecrate their lives. She realizes that this is the only noble option for girls and is already making a farewell speech, but as she is about to strike with her short sword, her eyes close due to tears. Sonia strikes and opens her eyes, but sees living girls in front of her, so she decides that the robbers were too skilled in their business and managed to snatch the sword from her hands before he cut off the heads of 2 young temple servants. Admitting defeat, she orders the girls to bite their tongues, but they shout at her and she turns around, seeing in front of her a student who was holding her sword and examining it, assessing its quality. Karlst managed to notice how the magician, whom his subordinates called a ghost, appeared and asked if he had bestowed care on his friends. Frey replied that he had come from their base camp at the top of the mountain and managed to take care of everyone there, angering Karlst, who ordered his bandits to attack him. But as soon as he was attacked by a group of bandits, Frey began to unleash his firepower, killing everyone who resisted, and was able to hit Karlst, who could not think of such a thing. Sonia, watching everything that was happening, noticed Isabel, who was holding the wounded man on her shoulders, and asked her who they were, but in response, she learned that they were not enemies for her. Karlst was able to dodge the constant magical attacks and continued to parry them, thinking that Frey would soon be exhausted. But having parried the next attack, he noticed that besides him, several robbers remained alive, and a spell flew at him, knocking him down and pushing him away, breaking his blade. Realizing that he is no longer able to fight, Karlst begs for mercy, but immediately notices that Frey is no longer attacking, and orders his bandits to make a dash and finish off the magician. Refusing help, Frey creates a spell that breaks the ground under the robbers' feet and buries them under the rubble. Sonia, Isabel, and everyone else watched in shock as the group of bandits were defeated by one skinny young mage, disappearing under the rubble and ending their screams forever. Sonia said that this was the first time she had seen a mage able to use a 5th-level spell while he was attacking with another spell. Isabel agreed with her. After introducing himself, Frey spoke in his usual casual manner, which surprised Sonia, who was from a noble family, and Isabel had to make an excuse on his behalf, while Luther recognized Frey's family. Luther said that the Blake family is one of the most powerful families supporting the Cascow Empire, and the head of the family, Issachar Blake, is the 6th most powerful magician in the kingdom, which made Sonia surprised. Frey finished arguing with Isabel and asked them where they were going, and learned that they were going to the same city, so he offered to escort them to Hispaniola. Luther refused. They needed to bury the corpses of the knights guarding Sonia, so Frey restored the carriage and put them in it. While they were walking, Sonia learned that Frey was actually not over 30, but only 20 years old. Sonia remembered that in fact the mercenaries were strong, but for Frey they turned out to be nothing, and asked where he got such strength, to which he replied that they needed perseverance and effort. Frey and Isabel said goodbye to those who died while accompanying the escort and stood in the port, from where they were about to leave beautifully into the setting sun. But Sonia stops them, asking for the opportunity to thank them for saving them, to which Luther agrees, and Frey decides to go with them to a tavern where they serve very tasty sausages. They go together to the tavern, and there they are met by the same owner, while Sonia and Luther did not understand how they, the aristocrats, ended up in such a sleazy place. Frey tells the seller that his son, whom they brought with them, also survived, and gave him first aid, shedding tears of joy. The father said that his son had disappeared while accompanying his mother and daughter, and the son apologized to him for running away then, but the father was only happy about his return. Frey at this time said that Isabel was quite good at healing magic, although she was ballast, but the tavern was crowded, so they were about to leave. The owner of the tavern heard their conversation and kicked out all the visitors, who at that time were eating quietly, and without taking payment from them, told Frey that today the tavern was completely empty, which pleasantly surprised him. Everyone had already sat down at the table and began to fill their bellies, while Sonia was in the bath and examining her scars on her right hand. But she finished, and Frey called her to everyone at the table. Sonia notices the change in Frey and tells him that he has become more courageous after washing off all the dirt from himself, and sits down at the table, but twists her ankle and falls right on top of Frey. Sonia's right hand is revealed to him, and he sees many large scars all over her arm, but he just says that it's very cool because it shows that she put in a lot of effort. Isabel is oblivious to this and asks her where she is going, whereupon she suddenly learns that she was originally heading to June's family. Frey and Isabel understand that Sonia is Pierre's fiancée, whom he told them about, and they understand that he is very lucky with his future wife. In the morning, they all gathered together to say goodbye to each other, and Sonia asks Frey to look into June's family, to which he replies that he will look if he can. Frey and Isabel go on a journey, and along the way they talk about how Pierre has been lucky all his life, because he was lucky to survive and get a good daughter-in-law. Their conversation ended with Frey announcing that they had arrived, and before them was a view of Schweizer's dungeon and Mount Drake, around which, even from afar, a terrifying aura could be seen. Frey said that the mountain is called Drake precisely because the most powerful predators in the world of monsters, drakes, live around it. And Isabel was shocked by what she heard. Not only did Isabel barely stand on her feet after his words, Frey also pointed out the huge footprint of the Drake King, causing Isabel to lose her balance and ability to think sensibly. Isabel continued to talk, but suddenly Frey created a spell and threw her aside, and a second later, the Monsters Club fell on the place where she was sitting. Frey looked at the attacker and realized that it was an ogre with 3 eyes and red skin, which means that he is a mutant. Isabel decided not to stand and just watch him. She began to create a fireball, which she launched at the ogre, but it did not damage him. Isabel realized that her magic was useless against such an enemy, and was upset. But Frey noticed that she had become much stronger, and decided to create an ice spell against the ogre, since fire did not take him. Frey conjured 2 strangely shaped ice spears and launched them at the ogres, reminding Isabel that Frey looked like Archmage Lucas Trowman. The ice did not penetrate the skin of the mutant ogre, and they retreated. Frey decided that the ogre's skin was fireproof and without flaws, and resorted to strategy. Frey conjured smaller ice spears and began to launch them at the ogre's head, driving them into each other so that the very first one crashed deeper and deeper. Concentrating, he continued to launch ice spears at him, and they pierced the ogre's head right through, knocking him down and taking his life. For a second they calmed down, having killed the ogre, who now lay dead in front of them, but he was immediately followed by the drakes, who flocked to the mana of Isabel and Freya, and were ready to pounce on them. Frey and Isabel began to fight the winged monsters' drakes, which were one of the strongest winged monsters, so they constantly had to defend themselves. Isabel fights heroically, but her attacks do not damage the drake, so she is left defenseless against the monster preparing to attack, and it is killed by Frey. Frey lands and exhales after a difficult battle, but immediately notices that behind him there is a huge monster who was looking for the source of the mana that had spread throughout the area. Isabel screamed that it was the Drake King, but Frey covered her mouth and pressed himself against the tree so that the monster could not notice the 2 of them and attack. After the threat had passed, Frey and Isabel healed each other on the top of a nearby mountain, after all they had been fighting for 2 weeks. But Frey remembered the main reason why he came to these mountains, telling Isabel that their rest was over and they were going to Shuhei's dungeon. They took off, and Frey began to tell the girl that the dungeon was on the top of the mountain ahead of them, as Shuhei told him, and they arrived at this place. Upon arriving on the island, Frey notices that the island is only an entrance, and that the dungeon is located underneath it, and is many times larger than the island. Isabel was listening to him at that moment, and again it seemed to her that Frey knew the greatest sage Shuhei, because he knew him well. Frey and Isabel enter the dungeon through a hole in the tree, and Isabel begins to have strange thoughts and arguments, so she is about to ask him a question but stops. They went down and saw a strange magical gate in front of them, which Isabel could not recognize, and she asks Frey a question. At his words, the girl could not contain her shock, and Frey sees a magic ball in front of her, which she decides to saturate with mana, and suddenly puffs of smoke begin to escape from it. The smoke cleared, and the 2 of them saw a child who was a young version of Shuhei, and Frey decided to touch him, but his hand went through, because it was just a hologram. Tears flowed from Frey's eyes when he saw his old comrade again, and he joked that he shouldn't look so young when he was still an old man. The hologram of Shuhei began to explain the rules for passing the dungeon, and asked them why they came here, but Frey at that time tried to come to terms with the fact that his voice would not be able to reach Shuhei. Frey clenched his fists with grief from the realization that he was the only survivor from those times, but those who caused all this chaos still live in the world. However, he soon stopped feeling sad about his situation, and promised himself that he would crush everyone who killed his loved ones and friends and continues to live in this world. At the same time, Shuhei's hologram asks the 2 of them the first question in order to open access to the dungeon, and Frey answers it correctly. Isabel went through them with Frey, but all she had on her mind was that Frey was actually Lucas Trowman. But just as she was about to ask him a question, he interrupted her. Isabel swallows the looming question and continues walking, and soon they find themselves in front of an identical magical door and an orb into which Frey has poured his mana. After Frey poured in his mana, a second hologram appeared from the ball, which represented Shuhei as a teenager, and he again began to ask a question in order to move on. Shuhei began to explain the question, the topic of which was Iris Fizban, one of the 4 greatest people, nicknamed the Black Witch, with an ideal appearance. The hologram continued to humiliate Frey by calling Lucas a stupid stone who does not understand women's feelings, with which Isabel agreed, but Frey did not listen to the end and answered correctly, opening the way for them further. Of Shuhei was waiting for them, but older, which gave Frey the understanding that the dungeon was his personal diary. Thus, Frey and Isabel went through one room after another, while he answered each question of the holograms correctly, which surprised Isabel over and over again. Entering the last room, they saw a hologram of Shuhei in old age, with a staff in his hands and a long beard. Shuhei began to say that his friendship with Lucas was the best thing that happened in his life, causing Frey to start crying, and he finally realized that the questions were meant for him. They proceeded to the final question, which required Frey to say Shuhei's real name, to which Frey answered Shuhei Weissman, and after that correct answer, the hologram disappears. Shuhei's hologram disappeared, leaving Frey in disbelief, while Isabel was filled with mixed feelings of shock and epiphany after hearing Shuhei call Frey Lucas, Shuhei's personal belongings, and Frey finds drops of an icy river in the chest. Isabel guesses that this is an icy river. One drop of it can give leaps in strength that an ordinary person can reach 4 stars. Frey informs her that he will need her to reach the 7th star, and Isabel finds the earrings, which Frey recognizes and says that he was the one who created them 4,000 years ago and named them Taipun. Isabel clearly heard what he just said and asks him to explain to her how it happened that Frey created these earrings so long ago, to which she learns that he is actually Lucas Trowman. He tells her that 4,000 years ago he fought with Shuhei against the demigod lord and lost, going into captivity. But soon he heard someone's voice and answered him. Isabel believed him that he got Frey's body completely by accident and knelt in front of him, giving away the earrings and asking for forgiveness from the great Lord Lucas Trowman. Lucas asks to call him Frey and says that he will no longer tolerate such an atmosphere, otherwise he will develop allergies from her antics. Isabel cleverly changes the topic of conversation, taking out a strange bracelet, which turns out to be the sage's staff, and Frey puts it on. Frey and Isabel continued to rummage through Shuhei's chests, finding the golem's core, and also turned their attention to the table that stood in the corner of the room. Frey approached this table and noticed a candle that could burn indefinitely thanks to mana, as well as a diary, which he opened, and on the first page he saw the inscription, "Lucas had disappeared." Frey continued to read the diary and learned that Shuhei described the events after Lucas's disappearance, that there was a conflict between Kasajin and the swordmaster Rushid, that Iris suddenly disappeared. Frey realized that his friend was fighting against everyone alone, taking on the burden of Lucas, turning out to be too weak for her. Shuhei's will, promising to cut off the demigod's head as revenge for everything he has done. Frey finishes his speech, and Isabel notices that the diary tells the reader to complete Anastasia, his best masterpiece, and Frey remembers the core of Anastasia's golem they found. Frey and Isabel leave the dungeon, and Frey remembers how, in Lucas's body as a child, he showed his first golem to Shuhei. Frey became angry for a moment, remembering Shuhei's humiliating laughter, but let go of those thoughts about his past. Frey continued to climb up the stairs, saying that completing Anastasia should fill in all the gaps in the history of the world after Lucas's disappearance, when suddenly he senses something strange. Of the Drakes was already waiting for them, who left them at their first meeting, but intended to settle the score. Frey asked the king of the Drakes, because he knew that he had intelligence, why he was waiting for them, and he answered that the man who created this dungeon and did not leave it had a bottle with drops of the icy river. Drake King said that Frey had a dangerous look, but he looked delicious, so he began to create a fire breath spell, and Frey asked Isabel not to interfere because he was not sure that he could handle it. Isabel said that she would be back soon and left, while Frey activated Shuhei's staff and began dodging his frenzied fire attacks, flying throughout the sky as if he were a winged monster himself. The drakes stood in his way, so he created 2 spells and combined them, rushing past them at great speed and killing every drake that dared to interfere with the battle. But even after killing one group of drakes, another immediately stood in his way, so Frey realized that as long as the king lived, there would be no end to them. Frey decided to figure out the right place to create an explosion spell to strike the Drake King while he was moving, and he did so, the explosion hitting the king's left side, knocking him off his feet for a moment. However, this blow was only enough for a moment, and the king of the Drake's Torkuda began his attack again, saying that Frey was quite good and quite experienced, but he lacked the strength to defeat him. Finding himself sandwiched between Torkuda and the Drakes, Frey remembers the drop of the icy river, as well as his conversation with Isabel, that he would need a week to stabilize the mana from consuming it. Frey decides that doing this is tantamount to suicide, so he makes a dash and cuts the Drakes, pinning him, dodging their blows. But at the end of the maneuver, he finds himself right in front of Torkuda's mouth. Frey miraculously managed to evade Torkuda's frontal magical attack thanks to Phoenix, who flew to the savior's aid. Phoenix decided to fight the Drake King, despite Frey's requests to fly away, because Torkuda was resistant to his attacks, and Frey realized that Phoenix was telling him to run away while he stalled for time, distracting Torkuda. Frey realized that Phoenix was asking him, Lucas Trowman, to escape, which is why he realizes that after moving through time, he was not decisive enough, which is why he got into such a situation, and decides to take a risk. Frey drinks a drop from the icy river, deciding that death is just another chapter in his life, so he should take the risk, and is then overwhelmed with mana, changing the color of his hair and causing him to scream in pain. Frey continued to scream in pain due to the overflowing mana. Blood began to flow from his mouth, and the excess energy began to materialize in the form of ice spikes around him. At this time, Phoenix, who had arrived to help Frey, listened to Torkuda's words that he was very lucky to meet such a strong person, and Phoenix, whose life force is incredibly valuable. Torkuda remembered meeting this same Phoenix a few days ago, and defeated it in battle, inflicting mortal wounds and pushing it to its breaking point, causing the Phoenix to flee. Phoenix tried to find help for several more days, and soon he sensed a strange mana coming from a cave under the waterfall, after which he broke the protective barrier and entered there, where he met Frey. Frey healed the wounded Phoenix and called him his longtime friend, which is why Phoenix now fought even more fiercely than before, attacking Torkuda. Phoenix slams his fiery claws into Torkuda, who, enraged, counterattacks him, hitting him in the torso and throwing him into the ground with great force. As Phoenix takes massive damage from the Drake King, Frey falls dead, exhausted from trying to absorb the elixir into his body, and tries to understand why he was so reckless. Frey almost faints, thinking that he lacked determination and strength, when suddenly his body began to fill with energy, and upon opening his eyes, he realized that Isabel was recuperating energy into his body, helping in the assimilation of the elixir. He realizes that he actually lacked trust in other people, so he completely trusts Isabel with his healing and, filled with energy, flies up from a prone position, making it clear that he is ready to fight further. At this time, Torkuda fights Phoenix, and for a second he loses his guard due to the energy from the cave, and Phoenix takes this opportunity and bites through one of the Drake King's eyes, weakening him. Torkuda screamed in pain and decided that he would not allow him to treat him like that anymore, so he bites through his torso and pushes him into the ground, inflicting wounds after which there is no chance of survival. The Drake King continued to bite Phoenix, screaming about how he dared to encroach on the site of the great Torkuda, and finally killed him, taking all the life force from his body. Phoenix was already lying on his last breath, when suddenly ice mana began to flow from the cave where Frey had flown, striking all the surrounding drakes with its power, freezing them. Drake King dodged the attack, but he wanted to escape from such power, humiliated in his own eyes, and Frey came out of the cave, surrounded by an aura that caused fear in Torkuda. He rushed with all his might, but stopped in front of Frey, who was in his face. Frey did not wait until Torkuda stopped being afraid of him, and created ice spears, which he thrust into Torkuda's body, throwing him back. Torkuda immediately broke all the spears and shouted a battle cry, but saw that Frey had disappeared and was now in his blind spot. Frey stuck an ice spike in his remaining eye on the left side of his face, and he angrily hit Frey with his wing, throwing him into the rock with such force that he broke through it, but was still standing. Frey emerged from the hole in the rock formed after his blow. Strength, a desire to win, and a desire to take revenge on him for Phoenix could be seen in his eyes, which made Tokuda surprised. Isabel watched their battle, realizing that Frey might fall unconscious due to the icy aura emanating from him and the enormous amount of unsynchronized energy. After he has cooled down from the blow he received, Frey creates a huge ice dagger for which he prepares his fiery breath. Drake King finished his spell and sent his fiery breath straight towards Frey, who responded in kind by aiming an ice dagger at him, causing the entire mountain range to begin to shake. However, Frey could not withstand the onslaught of Tokuda's enormous force for long. His ice dagger began to lose ground and be pushed back. But Isabel could not believe her eyes. She couldn't believe that Frey wasn't there when he sent his spell against Tokuda and was now in his blind spot, after which she created an ice scythe and cut off his head. Drake King all this time, because now his severed head, which was enormous, lay in front of her. Frey stopped floating and began to fall due to the fact that his body could not quickly get used to the huge amount of energy from the icy river, and Isabel caught him, flying with him to Phoenix at his request. When they finally flew to Phoenix, they found that he was already dead, so Frey decides to save him, because the brave Phoenix fought only because Frey helped him once. Isabel sees that Frey decides to save Phoenix's life. He lifts him into the air and takes his heart out of Tokuda's body, and Frey says that after completely absorbing the energy, the Phoenix should be reborn. Frey continues to watch this action and asks Phoenix to become the ruler of these lands, because Phoenix should become a good defender of his friend's dungeon. Frey and Isabel left the mountains of Spain and went to Cosymphony, where Frey sat on a bench, tying his white hair in a ponytail, which made him stand out very much in the crowd. Finally, he waited, and Isabel brought him juice and news that she had reserved seats on the ship, but the sailing would only be in a day, so Frey could only agree with her. They talk about how it was a very long vacation. They filled the spatial bag to capacity with weapons from Shuhei's dungeon, because Frey could not leave his friend's things to rot in that place. After learning that Frey's hair turned white due to the icy energy of a drop of an icy river, he and Isabel go to Pierre June's mansion. After all, they spent a week in this place, so they both agreed to this idea. Standing in front of the entrance to the vast territory of the mansion, Frey and Isabel cannot hide their surprise, and the nearest guard asks Frey who he is, to which he replies that he is Pierre's friend, Frey Blake. The guard recalls that Pierre told him that a stately man might come during the holidays, who should be treated no less respectfully than himself. While the guard could not understand how such a young guy received so much respect from Pierre and became so important to him, the second guard noticed in the distance a carriage that was taking the lady home. The guards, Frey and Isabel, watched as a beautiful lady who looked like Pierre came out of the carriage, and the guards warned her that a friend from the Blake family had come to see Pierre. A beautiful girl introduced herself as Pierre's sister, Lélia, and invited them to get into her carriage, because they all needed to go to the main building. The guard, who was trying to force Frey to explain, said that his identity had not yet been clarified, but Lélia silenced him with just one look, after which the three of them got into the carriage. The carriage started moving, and Lélia looked at Frey without embarrassment, and she asked Frey why his hair was white and not grey. Isabel listens to the fact that Frey had a lot going on during the holidays, and suggests switching to informal communication, to which she immediately hears his consent in response. Pierre's sister asks Frey how he treats him at the academy, and finds out that they have never met before, because Pierre is a second-year student, unlike him. After some time, they arrived in a beautiful garden and got out of the carriage to walk, when suddenly in the distance they noticed Pierre already waiting for them, who looked the same as before. Pierre first greeted his newly acquired friend, telling him that he was very late, because he had to wait for him for a long time at his estate. Lélia tried to wait for a very long time until they finished their welcoming conversation, but suddenly she stopped and told Pierre that she was also here, to which he asked how the young princess's party went. Isabel, Frey, and Pierre all went to the palace together, after which Frey just remembered that Pierre's bride was Sonia, whom he saved and brought to the city from the mountains of Spain. Pierre was shocked and said that Sonia deserves the title of reign at such a young age, after which Pierre announces that they will now meet his father, the head of the June family. Entering the dining room, they sat down at the same table, after which they began to greet each other and began to eat. Frey and Shepherd June were sitting in the center of the table on the side, opposite each other. Shepherd June asked Frey how Earl Blake was doing, to which Frey responded uncertainly, saying that he seemed to be healthy, at which time Isabel began to feel pressure. Shepherd June is the magician of the 7 stars, the master of the 4th tower, and there are only 5 such strong and outstanding people in the Empire, and Frey decided that he could learn a lot of useful things from him. While everyone at the table was having small talk about the upcoming banquet at the palace, which everyone was supposed to attend, Pierre tried to persuade Frey to go with him. Pierre said that he would allow Frey to stay with his father, and everyone except Shepherd and Frey left the hall. Shepherd suddenly wrinkled his face in a serious grimace, saying that an important conversation would now begin. Shepherd stood up from his seat and told Frey that the conversation would now begin about the very essence of the matter, and he expressed extreme surprise at these words. Frey came to his senses a little after Shepherd's strange and unexpected question, and he immediately clarified the question of how a man from the Trowman Brotherhood got into his house. Shepherd tells him that it was too reckless to come to his house with typhoon earrings, a symbol of a member of the Trowman Brotherhood, which makes Frey surprised, because he made them himself and found them. Pierre's father realizes that Frey is not who he took him for all this time, and Frey tells him that he is now ready to listen to the reason for his rudeness to the one who came to a friend's house to visit him. The Duke considered Frey too impudent and arrogant a boy, but his words about the reason for visiting their palace hurt him. The conversation began with the Duke explaining to him that on the continent only a small part of the power belongs to the empires, but he also said that he could not tell everything to someone he did not fully trust. However, then the conversation turned to the topic that caused Lucas's hands to shake in Frey's body, and Shepherd said that there is a true ruler of this continent who is a demigod. While the Duke was telling strange theories about demigods, Frey sat with a strange face from the realization that 4,000 years ago only 5 people fought against a demigod. Frey began to smile, causing Pierre's father to ask him why he reacted so strangely, realizing that now he was not alone, and the fight would be relatively even-sided. Shepherd guessed that Frey knew something about the demigod, and asked him about it, to which he learned that Frey found Shuhei's note when he took the earrings, and the Duke screamed in shock, but immediately calmed down. Pierre's father continued to say that no one knows how many demigods there really are, but they know that each of them is capable of wiping out humanity from the face of the earth with just a whim. Shepherd began to talk about how there had been several attempts in the past, and said that 5 heroes who are still known to everyone fought against the demigod 4,000 years ago. He said that all 5 of them fought together, but as soon as Luca Trowman disappeared, conflicts began between them, and only Shuhei remained, and that was the end of it. Shepherd continued that now there were followers of these 5 heroes, but 3 circles had become influential, except for Kasajin and Trowman, and Frey was hurt that the circle of his name was so weak. They got up from the table, and the Duke began to pour some expensive wine for the 2 of them, but the conversation turned to the fact that the main mistrust of Frey came from the earrings, Lucas's heirloom. Shepherd ended his story by saying that he still couldn't fully trust Frey, because he said that he found the earrings in the mountains of Spain, from where few people return alive. Frey told him that he accidentally ended up in Shuhei's dungeon, but could not tell him where it was, and Pierre's father dropped his jaw at this information. Shepherd asked for the typhoon earrings, and Frey agreed, poured mana into them, and restrained the minimum amount of power from the artifact. Evening came, after which Frey went to the ball, where he stands in splendid solitude, thinking about what he learned from the Duke. Thinking about the mountain of troubles that has fallen on his head, Frey notices Isabel walking towards him, and she asks him about her dress. Frey was looking at Isabel, who was starting to get angry at him after the strange things he said about her dress, and suddenly his mind shifts during the end of his conversation with Shepherd. Shepherd said that someone had come into contact with the demigod, to which Frey breaks down and screams about who it was, and receives in response the name of his father, Frey Blake. The central scene shifts again to a banquet, where one strange man named Gupsa is talking to the son of the Teositi family. Gupsa finished the conversation with this man and looked around, but suddenly one person made him squint, and this man was Frey, next to whom stood the beautiful Isabel. Frey is talking about something with Isabel, but they are interrupted by Sonia Aquarid, who arrived at this banquet, and Frey immediately tells her that her dress suits Sonia very well, and then Isabel went mad. Frey notices that Dormouse is blushing and looks like she wants to say something, so he offers her a drink, completely unaware of her feelings for him, and Isabel watches all this with a grin. However, their sweet conversation did not last long. A strange man called Frey from the side, saying that he never expected to see him here. This man was Gupsa, who tells Frey that he does not deserve to be at the banquet, because this is a battlefield for the capital's nobility. Frey interrupted his speech, thinking that he was a common bully, and told him to disappear. But Gupsa replied that Frey was completely crazy and forgot his place, enrolling in West Road Academy thanks to his family. Gupsa sees that something is wrong, because around Frey there are two dazzlingly beautiful girls who have no equal at this ball. Gupsa is interrupted by three young guys from the Teositi family, one of whom introduced himself as Patrick and greeted Sonia, who stood closest to him, and Gupsa said that she was Pierre's fiancée. Sonia became embarrassed and told Frey that not everything had been decided about the wedding. But then Gupsa told her that Frey Blake was the guy to whom someone like Sonia shouldn't even answer. Then Patrick realizes that it is Frey Blake and tells him that he must disappear from the banquet, which is why Isabel gets angry and starts screaming that people like them are not worthy of even Frey's toes. However, when Patrick finished his fiery speech about Frey's uselessness for his family, he said that whoever invited him to the banquet must be a fool, but suddenly Pierre June appears behind him. Pierre June announces that it was he who invited Frey, and also said that Frey is the most honorable invited guest at this banquet, whom Pierre wanted to see. So Patrick and Gupsa bit their tongues. After Pierre's own words, Patrick hesitated and began to beg for forgiveness, because this was a banquet named after Pierre, and he allowed himself such insolence. Pierre began to tell Gupsa that if not for these two factors, then he and Patrick would already be dead, because Pierre cannot allow thugs to insult his precious guest right to his face. After his words, Patrick and his people and Gupsa run away from the banquet, and Frey tells Pierre that he has a very scary character, to which he mockingly replies that it's time for him to look in the mirror. Having finished making fun of each other, they began to sample alcohol, starting a conversation about what the topic of conversation with his father was when Pierre and the others left the dining room. Frey said that the Duke asked him if he belonged to the Trowman Club, and Pierre wondered if he had decided to join. Frey began to remember what Shepard told him after the information about the demigod, and realized that Heinz actually hated Frey because he agreed to his exile. After finishing remembering that Shepard told him that Frey's wounds could not be healed, he told Pierre that he would not return to the academy, causing shock and surprise to the girl Isabel. Isabel stood there in a daze, realizing that now she would have nowhere to go if Frey did not return to the academy, and suddenly she was leaving the banquet alone. Frey continued to talk about how there were many more opportunities in the third tower, even when Isabel, all pale, left the banquet, leaving Sonia alone. Isabel walked through the palace when the lights had already been turned off, and thought about what she should do now and what she really wants to achieve. Suddenly she heard Frey and Pierre having a conversation in the room, and Frey told him that Pierre was actually gifted, even a genius. Pierre continued to lay out all the facts, talking about himself, and said that he wanted to open up to Frey for the first time in his life. In fact, he was cursed by his talent. After Pierre spoke about his cursed talent, he continued to tell the story, starting with the fact that as a child, he had a magic teacher. His teacher was a magician of 6 stars, the owner of the 5th tower, and just an old man with a long beard. He was a real guide in his life and magical science. However, everything lasted like this only until Pierre reached the 4th star and asked the teacher a question that he could not answer, and he was completely horrified, shouting that Pierre was a monster. At that moment, the teacher felt envy of the young guy, and Pierre was completely confused in himself because he did not know what to do. Pierre said that he would prefer to be ordinary, because then he would not be called a monster. Pierre spoke and cried at the same time, and Frey stood up and approached him. But instead of the expected words of consolation, he told him that this little one overestimates himself. Frey explained to him that in fact, even such a talent as Pierre's would not be enough to comprehend the true essence of magic, because this would require more than just talent. Frey swore that the next time they met with the already calmed Pierre, he would be several times stronger. And suddenly Frey spoke about the demigod. Humanity itself is on the heels of the demigod, a being who changed the rules and laws of this world. And this is both the weakness and the opportunity of humanity to change these foundations. Frey tells Pierre that if he still wants to pretend to be a genius, he can continue to live the same way, but he will achieve nothing. Pierre tells Frey that, after all, a guide is not always a teacher, but Frey answers Pierre that he will always be one step ahead, nostalgically remembering how he stood back to back with Shuhei. Pierre promises Frey that the next time they meet, he will stand in front of him face to face, and Frey agrees. And while Isabelle listened to their conversation, she began to cry when she realized for herself how she should live further. The next morning, as Frey is about to set off, Isabelle calls him from behind, asking if he forgot his ballast, and Frey smilingly replies that he does not and never had any ballast. Frey tells her that she shouldn't leave the academy, but she replies that the most powerful magician in the world is standing in front of her, and how could there be a better teacher than him? Frey reminds her that the path with him will be very difficult, but she only replies that she will not repeat herself, because whatever the path, she will go through it to the end, and they leave together on a new journey. The morning after the banquet, the escaped Patrick came to Michel with the news that his brother, Frey, had become close to Pierre June. Michel listened to Patrick and told him to get out of here, after which he thought about his words and asked Heinz his opinion about the rapprochement between Frey and Pierre, but he was not interested in this news. Michel told him that he had expected such words from him, but he thought to himself that an opportunity had arisen for them to take advantage of something again, and he left his office, leaving Heinz alone to look out the window. Meanwhile, Frey and Isabelle arrived in the city, and along the way, Isabelle examined the strange badge that Shepard had given Frey as a qualification for the Circle's entrance exam. Isabelle said that this was the first time she had heard about the demigod, and she had never even heard that, in fact, 5 heroes 4,000 years ago fought not just for justice. Frey began a tirade about how in the current state of humanity is a simple slave who is happy due to its achievements, and Frey is going to change the state of affairs. Frey also reminded her that he had not yet lost to the demigod, and they came to a huge magical head. Frey said that he would spend 6 months here, because he would only be able to join the circle after this time. While Isabelle could not find the end of the tower, Frey suddenly remembers how in early childhood he came to the magic tower along with Shuhei and Fizban and began to study magic. While they were standing in front of the tower, the dark elves came up behind them, and when Frey noticed them, he couldn't help but open his mouth in surprise. One of the dark elves noticed that they were being stared at, and Frey and Isabelle entered the tower, in which everyone was engaged in martial arts and practicing magical attacks, as if they were a single organism. Kasajin's battle training, she could already maintain a balance between the forces, and she finished. Isabelle turned around and saw Frey. One of the magicians approached her, saying that her friend Frey was behaving strangely, dancing all day on the battlefield of the tower, and then sitting in the library all night. Isabelle had perfected her technique, and could now see the streams of energy emanating from Frey, and realized that he was actually moving too fast, striking with great force. Liamson fought next to them, defeating another enemy, but suddenly he noticed Frey nearby, who was trying to hone his martial arts, and approached him. Liamson realized that he was a battle mage, and asked Frey this, but he replied that he was an ordinary one, and the dark elf decided that they needed to find out and offered to fight, surprising Isabelle. While Liamson suggested sparring to Frey, his teacher Camilla said that she was looking forward to working with Frey, and began to scold Liamson for his irresponsibility in Elvish. Camilla told him that wars are not so stupidly imposed, but suddenly Frey also began to speak Elvish, saying that he did not care about the circumstances and would be glad of any battle, surprising her and Liamson. Liamson told him that he was starting to like Frey more and more because he spoke like an elf, and they both began sparring with fighting stances of their respective styles. Frey knows about the Dark Elves' fighting style, and when the fight begins, Liamson lunges for a jumping kick, but Frey blocks his kick, surprising everyone around him. The Dark Elves' technique is a shadow silent step, and Frey remembers that the key to this movement is their foot, so he begins to fight, blocking his every blow and attack. After the next block, Frey is about to counter-attack, but Liamson manages to notice this and jumps back several times. Their fight resumes with even greater force. The Dark Elves from Liamson's group were shocked that the blows of an unfamiliar warrior named Frey were equal in strength to the blows of Liamson, who was the strongest of their group. Camilla watched their fierce sparring from the other side, but suddenly realizes that with each blow, the mana in his body is distributed evenly, strengthening his every movement. When she realized this, she asked for the fight to stop, and Liamson said that Frey's movements were flawless, to which he responded as well. Frey said that most likely, Liamson was not used to fighting with his bare hands, so if he had a weapon, Frey would have lost, and with these words, he not only surprised Liamson. Camilla took Liamson away and approached Frey herself, saying that she was surprised by his skill, but fell silent when she saw the Typhoon earrings on Frey, which caused him to misunderstand. Camilla asked him why he was in the tower, and Frey said that he needed to finish one elixir, about which he was trying to find information in the library of the third tower. She said that Frey could read magical grimoires on this topic, but to read such literature, she must pass a qualification exam and receive approval from the 3 floor guardians. Frey finds out how he can pass this test, and when it will begin, and understands that the exam will take place tomorrow in the third magic tower. The next day, a line of people who wanted to take the test crowded in front of the library, and everyone was discussing Frey, calling him a strange dancer. Suddenly, Frey and Isabel were kicked by Camilla and Liamson. They also came to the exam, saying that it would be interesting what would happen if Frey was present. 3 examiners came out onto the balcony on the 3rd floor, and Camilla said that the most influential was the one who stood in the middle, Mikkel. Entering the stage, Mikkel started talking about how he didn't want to wait too long, so he immediately began the first exam, which was to create an energy ball. The second task was to concentrate the ball, and in order to go further, you need to make it smaller than the bead. Mikkel passed by everyone, but stopped at Isabel, who did what was required and let her pass, but stopped in front of the elves, saying that they did not have to take the exams further. But suddenly, Mikkel heard that one of the test-takers refused to take the exam, but when he looked for himself, he could not believe his eyes, because Frey had concentrated the mana so that it was not visible. Mikkel asked Frey what his name was and what family he was from, and said that his results were incredible, and they needed to talk in his room, the room of the chief guardian of the 3rd floor of the magic tower. Walking into his room, Mikkel asked Frey if he had reached 5 stars, and he did not deny, adding that he came to the 3rd tower thanks to the direction of Duke Shepherd, and Mikkel asked him about the demigod. Mikkel said that traces of the demigod were found in Utiano, or rather his apostles, those who can use divine power. Frey listened to him, but still did not understand why he was called to him, and Mikkel explained that he needed help accompanying the investigation about the apostles, to which Frey instantly agreed. Mikkel showed Frey his hand, on which was the relic of Iris, the Almit Circle, and explained that after the murder of Lucas Trowman, the opponents of the circle became even more aggressive. After finishing explaining about the reinforcements in the form of dark elves, Mikkel mentioned that he could not help but notice the Typhoon earrings in Frey's ears. While Frey was thinking, Mikkel said that it would take a week to prepare for the campaign, and in just a week, Frey needed to stabilize the energy received from the icy river. Meanwhile, Mikkel asked Frey why he took the exam with such strength, and he learned that Frey needed to prepare an elixir, and Mikkel advised him of an alchemist he knew at the academy. Frey came to the place indicated by Mikkel and met a strange young girl there, so he did not immediately realize that this was the brilliant alchemist of the academy, Professor Adelia. Adelia realized that Frey is the one Mikkel told her about and lets him into the office, but immediately tells him that he must convey to her the essence of his problem in 5 words, and Frey responds with the creation of liquid mana. Adelia replies that Frey is quite cocky for a guy his age, but when she saw the bottle of concentrated mana mixture that Frey gave her, she couldn't help but scream in surprise. Frey told her that this is the blood of Torquda's heart, the estimated mana of which is 100,000, which made Adelia's eyes run wide. Frey asks her for details, and Adelia says that the difficulty lies in the ingredients, because she needs a phoenix feather, but Frey immediately puts the feather on the table, which makes her even more surprised. Adelia tells him that she has never seen this kind of material in person, but she cuts short, saying that she lacks an assistant, and Frey immediately began to show her his skills in magic. Adelia and Frey began preparations, working together, and then Adelia remembers that she had never heard his name, but Frey remains silent, and Adelia decides to make him her assistant. Frey refuses her offer, but she grabs onto him and starts screaming, but Frey stands his ground and unhooks himself from her. Adelia notices that Frey calls her a professor, and learns that Frey is actually a student at the academy, but Frey mentions that he has already left there, ending all the professor's plans and hopes. Frey asks her if Adelia understands golems and their creation, but when asked whether it is possible to create a golem from a core with more than 1,000,000 mana energy, he receives a categorical refusal. Adelia explains to him that without a body made of orichalcum and without a nervous system embroidered from mithril, such a golem cannot exist and will not be controllable. Frey realizes that the task that Shuhei left him after his death turned out to be much more difficult, and Adelia asks him if he might have such a core, to which he, putting on a smile, says that he does not. In the end, while the preparation of the elixir continued as usual, Frey and Liamson continued their training sparring, which made all the Dark Elves respect Frey. Frey finished sparring with Liamson, and they heard shouts of praise from the elves, who thanked Isabel for her magic lessons. Isabel noticed Frey, who had also finished his training, and approached him, asking when the elixir would be prepared, and Frey replied that it was completed tonight. Camilla told the two that she was very grateful for their help, and in return offered to teach them spiritual magic by binding herself to a close spirit, since this technique is known only to dark elves. Sometime later, Frey came to Professor Adelia for the elixir they were preparing, and she said that it was absolutely ready. Adelia told him that he could die from bones burned from the inside because the concentration of mana was twice as high, but Frey grinned, snatching the precious elixir from her hands. Professor Adelia told Frey that if he drank it without preparing, he would be burned to the bone from the high concentration of mana. Frey called her over because he wanted to thank her for the elixir and gave her the necklace, but Adelia took this as a sign of a romantic proposal, blushing, and ran away from him. She pushed him away with her hand, when he just stood there and tried to explain that this necklace would help improve concentration while working, but she didn't listen and screamed about a forbidden relationship. Torquda's heartblood. He finished scattering the ice crystals when the temperature in the room dropped greatly. Then he sat down in the middle of the room and took out an elixir, which he immediately swallowed in one gulp. At the same time, Isabel and Camilla were talking about him, and Camilla asked what the power of the Seven Stars magician really was, because she had not fully studied human magic and could not accurately understand it. Isabel answered her that the title of Archmage is given only to great people, and in any state the Archmage will be guaranteed the title of Count, and his name will be written on the stone tablets of the Imperial Palace. Camilla was a little surprised by such privileges, and asked if Frey had reached such a level. But Isabel shook her head and said that now he was only at the entrance to this great power. Frey absorbed the elixir and felt a huge amount of energy, while Isabel told Camilla that Frey was doing this to reclaim the world from the hands of the demigod. The next day, a week of preparation passes, and the group, led by Mikkel and Frey, moves to the city of Hall Bridge, in which traces of the apostles were seen, and Isabel felt an ominous energy. Frey also felt this strange energy that he had not felt for so long, and realized that it was divine energy, causing his jaw to unconsciously clench. The whole team walked through the streets of an empty small town, and everyone discussed its history. But Mikkel asked Frey if it was normal to take Isabel with him on such a dangerous mission. Mikkel mentioned that Isabel had not said a word since they left, but Frey just shook his head, saying that she had a role to play in this campaign, and suddenly Isabel told everyone that there was someone ahead. The people our group saw ahead exclaimed in surprise, because for the first time in their town, magicians from the tower appeared, and one of them introduced himself as Aladir, the mayor of this place. Mikkel greeted the mayor and asked if anything strange had happened lately, but the only response he received was that everyone in the city was busy with routine business, and Frey joined the conversation. The mayor did not answer immediately, hesitating for a moment, and said that everyone was busy with business in the forest, but Frey caught him in his mistake, because he had just said that now everyone was busy with routine matters. Frey did not bother with him and asked Liamson to run around and find out the situation in the city, and he immediately obeyed him, surprising Mikkel with such obedience towards a person. Liamson managed to jump onto the roofs of the tallest buildings in the town in a few seconds and returned with the words that he had not found anyone and that everything around the city was covered in blood. After Liamson's words, Aladir and his men opened their eyes in surprise and turned into strange humanoid creatures, increasing in size and strength, and began to attack our group. Aladir, in his strange guise, jumped on Mikkel, but Isabel rushed to his aid, creating a quick-fire wall spell that hit two creatures, but failed to hit one of them. The two surviving monsters were about to attack the two defenseless ones, but then Frey arrived in time, cutting the first one into pieces. After Liamson finished off the penultimate of the monsters, Frey pinned the remaining one to the ground with his foot and began to interrogate him, but Camilla approached, saying that this matter could be left to her. Camilla told them that this would be a good opportunity to see dark elf spiritual magic in action, and began to chant a long elven spell. As soon as she finished, a strange spirit in the form of a flying eye appeared, which she called the Dark Goron, a spirit that is best at stealing information from a victim, and it attacked the monster. The Dark Goron penetrated the monster's head, after which Camilla sat down opposite the now obedient mayor, asking where all the people in the city had gone. The monster said that all the inhabitants were dead because they were brutally killed as victims of an offering that was carried out in order to create the creation of the demigod and release the power of the apostle. However, Camilla continued to sit opposite the monster and listen to him, but he suddenly fell silent, and his eyes glowed with fiery mana, after which she stood up and screamed. But at that moment, there was a huge explosion. The explosion continued to spread, and fortunately the group was helped by Frey's earrings, which created a barrier, and Mikkel said that this spell was cast by the apostle, so they urgently need to return. The explosion ended, and the area became visible again, but Mikkel began to say that they could not cope with the apostle without Honor Lux, the magician of the 7 stars, and they should wait for his return in the city. Frey told him that he would take his place, but Mikkel told him that only the magicians of the 7 stars can use the fusion of incompatible phases when two opposing forces unite. Frey told him that this was not arrogance, and began to create two huge forces of fire and ice, which contradict each other at their core, causing Mikkel's displeasure, but Frey began to combine these forces. Mikkel asked Frey if he had really reached the 7th star, since he was able to combine two huge forces, like an experienced high-class magician, and he again only answered him that he could replace Honor Lucasa. Late at night, the group examined the city, and Camilla told Frey that she had found a not completely burned corpse, which seemed to have been struck by lightning at death. Mikkel explained that one day, after winning a battle with the apostle, his demigod disappeared, and Frey was petrified by this information. The group moved to the forest, which was nearby, and when they walked through it, there were not even insects left. All the trees in the area were dead, and Camilla asked why do this to nature. They stopped in a place surrounded by dead trees. Isabel leaned her hand against one of them and said that an elaborate barrier had been erected around this forest. Isabel said that it would take at least a few days to remove the barrier, but Frey sat down in the same place as Isabel and began scanning the barrier. Camilla said that she would watch Frey's back while he was busy. But as soon as Camilla finished speaking, Frey stood up from his seat and announced that he had removed the barrier. Everyone stood behind Frey, and he began to create a storm wind spell, which with its power blew away the entire area surrounding them, clearing their field of vision. Frey finished his spell, and Mikkel was the first to notice that an apostle had appeared ahead of them, but could not help but be surprised that it turned out to be Honor himself, Lux. None of the team could believe their eyes, because Honor was standing in front of them. Lux, but now no longer a magician, but an apostle, told them that Mikkel should have waited a little. Mikkel began to resent him that a person like him could not join the forces of the demigods, but Apostle Honor Lux launched a bolt of enormous power at him, The lightning flew straight to the target at great speed, but Frey blocked it, surprising the apostle, and asked why such a person as the head of the honor circle, Lux, began to use the powers of the demigod. The apostle said that he knew his power and realized that before the demigod, any person, regardless of title, rank or power, is just a bug, causing Frey to have an attack of anger. Frey told him that Honor Lux simply chickened out before the enormous power of the demigod, because everyone in his circle knew about it, but continued to fight. And Isabel realized that this was the first time she had seen him so angry. The apostle answered him that he was not afraid, but recognized his strength. But Frey continued that each person in the circle rose from their knees over and over again to protect what they love. Frey finished by saying that this was the nobility of man that Lux refused. But the apostle immediately created a lightning spell, knocking out almost everyone in the group except Frey. Isabel realized that this was the apostle's power, which was on a completely different level. But Frey was confident. But Lux said that he now had more strength than the wizard of the 7 stars. Dark clouds began to accumulate and consume the sky, and Camilla said that this is not human power, this is the real power of a demigod, and Frey told them that this is indeed a piece of his power. Frey began to explain to his group the tactics, in which Liamson is on the front line. He has 3 lives in his hands. Camilla covers from the rear with the help of magic, and Mikkel supports them and tries not to interfere. Frey finished with everyone except Isabel, and walking up to her, he said something that made her very surprised, and said that it was deadly, but Frey replied that they did not have time to discuss. Frey summoned Shuhei's staff, and together with Liamson, they charged, beginning to execute their strategy, and Liamson struck the apostle, but was thrown back by a single movement of his hand. Following Liamson, Frey burst into the battle, having already prepared a powerful burning earth spell, launching it at the apostle, and Mikkel, who was watching from afar, could not help but admire his skill. The spell hit the target, but Frey did not feel that it had caused any damage, and the apostle burst out of the ground without a scratch on himself after such a powerful earthquake. Frey came to his senses and continued to constantly create new spells and launch them at the enemy, limiting his field of vision. But the demigod's shield saved the apostle from any damage. The group saw this, and Camilla began to worry, saying that Frey would soon run out of steam. But Isabel said that everything was going according to plan, because Frey told her that he was going to confuse him about the battle's perception. Isabel told them that Frey actually asked to get rid of the storm in the sky, which gives the apostle the power of a demigod, by collecting a huge amount of mana, along with Camilla and Mikkel. Frey continued to throw pointless attacks at the apostle, and Lux began to wonder about the strength of this kid. But then he realized that Frey was not actually trying to damage him. He realized that Frey was trying to limit his view to allow the group to prepare mana for something larger, and he immediately launched a huge lightning bolt at them, to which Frey had no time to react. The lightning hit the target, hitting the magicians in Frey's group, and the apostle was about to finish them off, until Frey had time to block his second attack, but Liamson managed to stop him with his spear. Liamson cannot withstand the pressure of the enormous power of the lightning demigod and flies away, and Frey overtakes the group of magicians, but Isabel immediately tells him that the 3 of them are collecting mana for his plan. At this time, Liamson attacks Honor again, Lux, and the apostle grabs Liamson by the neck, but he reaches the spear with his foot and at the decisive moment delivers a cutting blow to the body. The apostle received a cut on his torso and was about to finish off the wounded dark elf, but suddenly he felt that Frey began to create a powerful spell. Frey decided that now was not the time to spare the mana, and he should become an ideal bait, and doubts appeared in the apostle's thoughts, but it was already too late, and the spell was sent straight to him. Frey's spell hit the target, and the lava explosion hit the apostle, leaving behind a huge crater. And Liamson took this as a victory, but not everything turned out to be so easy. Suddenly, an apostle rose from the crater, having lost his barrier, but this is only a trifle compared to the loss of his left hand, because the spell had enormous power, but all of Frey's mana was spent on it. Frey rose from his knees and said that in fact he could fight without mana, and the apostle summoned lightning, preparing to repay Frey for losing the stability of the barrier and his left hand. The apostle launched a small amount of lightning at Frey, but he was able to dodge them without mana thanks to his experience, and went to the rear of the defenseless Lukes, striking him in the torso. The apostle felt the difference in their experience, and now he was shaking with fear in the face of the danger in the form of Frey. But after a while, the apostle realized his situation. The apostle stopped being afraid of Freya and flew into the air, causing a new wave of lightning thanks to the clouds covering the sky, and said that it was time to get Freya what he deserved, because his mana would not run out. However, his speech, accompanied by a huge amount of lightning around him, was interrupted by Limson, who kicked him in the face. The apostle fell to the ground, sandwiched between two opponents, while Isabel, Camilla, and Mikkel continued to accumulate mana for a spell that would dispel this storm in the sky. During this time, Frey and Liamson are defeated in close combat against the apostle, as both of them ran out of mana, and Luke struck them with lightning, causing hellish pain throughout their bodies. The apostle is already preparing to kill each of them in the most painful way possible, but suddenly a group of magicians finish collecting mana and create a warring storm spell. Everyone on the battlefield froze, and the storm spell hit the storm clouds directly, opening the sky, shining sunlight directly onto the apostle, causing him to experience hellish pain and burn alive. Until the very end, Honor Lukes begged the demigod for help, but he never received anything in response and was burned alive in the sunlight. In the end, the apostle turned into a charred body, able only to speak, and Mikkel sat next to him and asked Lukes about why he sided with the demigod. Mikkel convinced Frey that he would not need much time, and he asked the apostle if Lukes could return to the side of humanity and continue to do good deeds. Instead of agreeing with Mikkel, the apostle grabbed him with both hands and pressed him to him, saying that it was too late for him to return to where he started. The apostle was not going to retreat even after defeat, so he captured Mikkel and exploded, taking him with him to the next world, and no one from the group had time to do anything in such a short moment. Isabel began to cry and ran to the scene of the explosion, where nothing was left. But Frey picked her up and told her that everything had gone wrong in the world. Frey said that this path will be very difficult and long, but everyone must endure. It is the duty of each of them. The next day, they returned to the city, and Frey was lying in his bed, looking at the crystal that appeared after the murder of Apostle Lukes, and Isabel suddenly entered his room. Isabel told Frey that in fact there were also dark elves in the circle, and this made Frey remember how he learned from Mikkel that he was also a member of Fizban Amlit. Mikkel told him that there are not enough people in the circle now, but there are also strong people in their circle, such as Altan, who entered into a contract with Barbatos, who is the great prince of the demonic world. Frey remembered that in fact, all the princes of the demonic world are extremely proud, so the likelihood of concluding a contract with them is 0. Having finished thinking about Fizban Amlit and that he needs to give the crystal to Professor Adelia, having learned her opinion, and someone knocked on the door. Ironically, it turned out to be Professor Adelia, and she notified Frey that Mr. Julian, the head of this Tower of Magicians, wants to see him and Isabel. They came to his office and he introduced himself as Julian Montoliber, the head of the Third Tower of Magicians, told Frey that he had wanted to meet him for a long time. Julian is very sorry about what happened to the owner of the floor, Mikkel, but he was confused by the fact that the identity of the apostle was not clarified. Frey told Julian that Mikkel had a proud end, and Julian became more serious when he told Frey that he wanted him to continue Mikkel's legacy and become the master of the floor. Frey said that he was not too young for such a title, but Julian told him that his brother from the Blake family, Michel, became the master of the floor at only 26 years old. However, Frey did not look at all the advantages of such a title, so he told Julian that he still refused the offer. They leave the office of the head of the tower, and Adelia begins a tirade about how Frey was too stupid to refuse the position of floor guardian and all subsequent privileges. Adelia continued her tirade, and Frey remembered that he wanted to show her something important, and took her to a room where she saw the apostle crystal, which made her eyes pop out of her head. Adelia told him that in this form his crystal was just beautiful garbage, but it could turn out to be a potion that was incomparable in power to the heart of a 1,000-year-old drake. Frey asked her for help in this matter, to which she asked seriously at first, But after a few seconds, her face said that this was the most exciting activity. They agreed, and after some time, Frey went to a meeting that Camilla had organized, and he saw that she had brought with her two people in long cloaks. Frey greeted Camilla, but she approached him with a serious face and said in Elvish that the hooded man with an unpleasant face was Foss Anoan Tugendshar from Fisban Amlit. Frey responded with a question about the second person next to Anoin, but before he could hear Camilla's answer, they were interrupted by Anoin, who told them to speak in human language and called Frey a scoundrel. Anoin brazenly ordered Frey to tell the details of the campaign against the Apostle, to which he replied that he wrote everything in the report, but Anoin did not like it. Liamson wanted to intervene, but Frey stopped him and said that he was not part of the Fisban Circle Amlit, which means that he does not intend to tolerate such treatment from members of this circle. Honor Tugendshar continued to insult Frey, but suddenly a hooded man standing next to him grabbed him by the arm and asked him to stop. This man shut up Anoin and approached Frey, removing his hood and forcing him to calm his anger, and greeted his brother, because this man was Heinz Blake, Frey's second eldest brother. Frey ended their meeting and went to his room with Heinz, who stood by the window and said that Frey had changed a lot, having become friends with Pierre June. Heinz told him that his changes were very noticeable, but still, it was not worth starting a quarrel with such a person from Fisban. Amlit is like Anoin, because he occupies too high a position in this clan. Heinz also warned Frey that a man from the Blake clan would soon come to him, and he should be refused, because now the situation in the clan is tense, since Isaka, their father, has come into contact with the demigod. Frey realized that he heard this information from Honor Shepherd, but asked Heinz what he was doing, since he was acting just like an older brother, causing Frey to wonder the reason why he really came. Frey told Lanes that he didn't really consider him a person, and only changed his attitude because Frey had risen a little in status. Heinz was a reason for Frey to be disappointed in himself, but he responded to his words that he sincerely wished that Frey would not study magic and live peacefully, taking Frey by surprise. Heinz added that Frey should not trust people from the circles too much, and leaves, saying everything he wanted, leaving Frey to think about his words. Heinz leaves, and another person from the Blake family, the butler Alexander, comes to Frey, and then Frey realizes that Heinz was right. Alexander, his butler, informed Frey that the head of the Blake family was waiting for him, but at that time, because of his behavior, he thought that Frey remained the same weakling, and nothing had changed in him. Alexander said that the head of the family was expecting him immediately and was about to leave, but Frey told him that he had his own business, so he would visit his father a little later. Frey said that he would visit his father on his own when he was free, and Alexander at first said that this was an order from the head of the family, but then he realized that he could not persuade him and left him. A few days later, he met with Adelia, who gave him 2 bottles, saying that this crystal made her suffer because she had spent several hundred gold. Frey told her that he would reimburse the entire fee and also give a reward, but the professor replied that she could not charge the student a fee, but would be glad to take him on as an assistant. Frey noticed that the second bottle did not contain a potion at all, and she said that when processing the crystal, it turned out not only a potion, but also a clot of lightning energy that could not be processed. Frey again came to his room. In front of him stood a bottle of potion, which he drank in one gulp, and a huge amount of concentrated mana again appeared in his body. While distributing the mana, Frey felt a strong wind begin to blow around him, and realized that his abilities had now improved to the point that he could use his entire body as a storehouse for mana. That evening, Frey called Isabel outside, and when she arrived at the indicated place, she was heartbroken by the cuteness of the kitten sitting next to Frey, and he explained that this was his spirit of darkness, Darkmin. Isabel thought that she needed to learn the spiritual technique quickly, and sat next to Frey, asking what his next goal would be, since he had already completely calmed the energy of the icy river. Frey said that now it was time for them to gradually get ready to leave this place, and Isabel did not argue, because it would be better that way, and asked if Frey was now going to join some kind of circle. That night, Frey went to his home after talking with Isabel and had already begun to pack his things for their departure, but suddenly there was a knock on the door, and Frey felt a strange but not hostile energy. Frey also felt the overwhelming emotions of the person behind the door. So he stood up and opened it, seeing a young girl in a strangely familiar cape, and she removed her hood, revealing to him beautiful green hair, telling him that she was Banyan Argento, head of the Trowman circle. Frey invited the head of the circle into his room, calling Isabel, and began the important conversation for which she came here. She said that as soon as she found out about Frey, she immediately rushed after him, and representatives of other circles might soon arrive. Trowman Circle is interested in the strength of the two students who defeated the Apostle at such an early age. During the discussion, Frey noticed that she was wearing a cape that he created in Lucas's body 4,000 years ago. But Frey was not more interested in this, and he asked if Master Banyan was a dragon, surprising all the girls at the table. Frey caught her off guard with his question, and in shock, Banyan dropped the coffee mug she was holding in her hand. Dragons do not have a vessel for mana, because their heart is a mechanism that allows them to use it from the atmosphere. Frey surprised her by adding that she has a vessel for mana, like an ordinary person, but he sees the purest mana inside her. Banyan smiled, saying that she was half dragon, half human, and was born from such a strange connection between two creatures. Frey escorted Banyan out of his room, saying that he would be down to see her soon, and continued his conversation with Isabel. She said she was surprised that Banyan was not shy about talking about the circle's problems, because it was strange for the head. But she was more surprised that Frey himself asked to come to the Trowman circle, to which he replied that there were a lot of interesting things there. Isabel asked him what could interest him, because this happens very rarely, since Frey already knows his path. Frey did not pick up her joke and said that it was only important for him to gather all his forces in one place to achieve his goal. Hearing his answer, Isabel couldn't help but remember how Shuhei wrote in his diary that Lucas was the center of attraction for everyone. They left the room, and Isabel concluded that a truly great man does not change his words. They went down to Banyan, but saw in front of them a rather strange scene between her and the head of another circle, which they could not expect. Tugunshar stopped shouting at the girl when he saw Frey, and two more men came out in front of him wanting to talk. The one higher was Jerome Berno from Rashida Sot, and the second was Stephen Giak from Straw Neckles. Frey realized that they had also come to him, and they said that they were a little late, and the head of the circle, Trowman, came first. Tugunshar asked Frey if he was going to join Trowman's circle, and added that they were a perfect match, causing Banyan to clench her fists. The heads of the remaining circles asked Frey to stop by when he had inspected the Trowman circle, to which he politely said that he might do so later. Anoin would like to invite him too, but he answered that they needed to get away from prying eyes in the hall to talk in private. Anoin Tugunshar asked Banyan to stay here, and she only silently agreed, but replied that Frey should be careful. Frey asked Isabel to stay with her and smiled, saying that he would be back soon, because it wouldn't take much time. The two of them leave. It is already deep night outside, and they are in the forest not far from the tower, where there was not a soul. When they stopped, Frey brazenly said that this was not the right place to invite a person like him into the circle. Anoin replied that he did not believe his victory over the Apostle, so he decided to conduct a personal exam for Frey to join. After these words, Anoin exploded with mana, creating strange vines from the ground that immediately attacked Frey. Frey remained motionless, but asked him what he would do if he really killed the Apostle. Tugunshar answered him that even in this case he could handle Frey, because he was not like all the other magicians of the 7 stars. Frey agreed that not all magicians are equally powerful, including himself, and released his mana, confusing Tugunshar. Frey did not lift a finger to repel Anoin's attacks and spells, causing him to fear for his life. Anoin did not stop being afraid of him, but still began to create a powerful spell that could be dangerous for Frey, without suspecting anything. He did not have time to finish the spell, because suddenly it simply disappeared, forcing Anoin to think about what this young magician was capable of. Anoin was shocked, because cancelling the spell of a high-ranking magician is much more difficult than making a flying blade fall by calculating and then changing the trajectory. Before he could finish his thought, Tugunshar felt his body being enveloped from his feet by ice from mana, which he was unable to resist. He was completely immobilized and asked what Frey would do with him after his defeat, hinting that either death or shame awaited him after this. Frey said that he would not kill him now, but would try to test the will and strength of Tugunshar, since he found himself in this position through his own fault. Frey said that if he could change overnight into a new person by changing his principles and character, then he would survive and break the ice. This angered Tugunshar, and he shouted on what grounds someone like Frey dared to check him, a member of an influential circle with extensive connections. However, he ended his screams when he realized that Frey looked like a much larger person than he was, as if he had a second personality, unlike him. Frey remained unshaken and said that he needs to kill his past self and bury it deep in his heart by becoming someone else, and this is his advice to Anoin. Frey turned around and left after telling him that he sincerely hoped that Anoin would improve after this incident and be able to survive. Banyan and Isabel were already waiting for him at the exit of the forest and asked if everything went well and if Frey was okay. Frey said that everything was fine with him, but Isabel replied that she was most worried not about him, but about the life of Tugunshar after talking with Frey. Frey told her that Anoin would not die, because the ice would melt before noon tomorrow anyway, even if he did not surpass himself and could not melt it with his own powers. They set up camp, and Banyan made soup from what she had on hand, but said she wasn't sure how it would taste because she didn't cook in such conditions very often. The three of them ate soup, and Isabel said that she could clearly see how Banyan was accustomed to sleeping in the open air when traveling. Frey asked for more, eating the first portion at one point, and asked Banyan about which demigod killed the great ancestor circle master Osel Argento. The question of which demigod killed her father initially shocked her and made her remember bad moments, but she said that it did not affect her and everything was fine. Isabel screamed at Frey for treating the fragile girl this way, but Banyan began her story, speaking with a sad face. Banyan began to say that the demigods have their own hierarchy, and the one who stands above all is called the Lord, and Frey was very surprised at her knowledge. She continued to say that among the less powerful demigods, there are those who are the strongest, and they are called Apocalypse. Banyan said that they studied the three demigods Poison, Death, and Sword, and her father died from the battle against the Death Apocalypse about 2 years ago. Frey thought about her words and realized that he knew Apocalypse Poison. He was an incredibly strong old man, whom he was unlikely to cope with now. They spent the night in a camp in the forest, but the next morning they set out and soon reached the Finisco forest, where members of the Trowman circle live rings. Frey noticed an incredibly strong barrier around the area, and Banyan explained to him that it was created by her father, but she could only repair it if it broke. Frey thought about how the great ancestral master was at least 8-star level, while his daughter was most likely 6-star, all because of her life among humans rather than dragons. Frey thought that it would have been better if she had been born among people, but discarded these thoughts because it was impolite to sympathize with someone else's level of power. They walked through the barrier a few seconds later and saw houses being built all over the place, and Banyan said that as the main area of the circle it didn't look very good. Honor suddenly ran up to them, Giselan, and tells Banyan that while he could not contact her, they were attacked again. He continued to say that the basilisk tails, like hyenas, came and took the relic, which made Banyan's eyes suddenly darken. Banyan came to her senses and said that she didn't know what to do because she brought Frey and Isabel here, but not the most peaceful times had come. The man also greeted Frey, apologizing that he could not prepare everything properly before his arrival because such a situation had occurred. Banyan accepted this and asked what relic they took this time, and the man replied that they took the red ring, catching Frey by surprise. Frey began to remember that the red ring was one of 7 rings that he made himself 4,000 years ago, but forgot where he put them. But he was brought back to reality when they were approached by 3 suspicious men who told Banyan that they had stopped by to say hello, but she was not home. Banyan introduced him by saying that she had been seeing Launder Antoine a lot lately, to which he replied that he had come to lighten her load. Launder said that he would really like to have tea with her, but they had business, and left, saying goodbye to the members of the circle, leaving Banyan biting her lip in frustration. Frey asked Giselan to explain what the fight for the relic meant, and learned that it was a competition with the circle's relic at stake. He said that it was an established tradition, and Frey asked if it could be abandoned, but learned that this would have consequences for the circle Trowman. Frey said that he understood the situation. The basilisk tails are a group of hyena-like people who are stealing the relics of the weakened Trowman circle. Gisellen said that all the small and medium-sized circles around them have already united, and now they come here in the absence of leadership once a month. Gisellen said that now their strength is less than 1/10 of what it was in better times, so they will soon disappear or be absorbed by other circles. Frey thought about the fact that Banyan invited him here, but still told the whole truth about the circumstances in the Trowman circle, without hiding anything. Isabel brought him back to reality from his thoughts, and they saw a statue of Lucas Trowman in front of them, and Frey walked up to it with a sad look. He stroked his past name with his hand, but suddenly someone behind him asked if he really liked the statue of Mr. Lucas so much. The man who called him introduced himself as Fian, another honor from Trowman's circle, and apologized to Frey for causing him trouble. They introduced themselves to each other, and Frey asked if he could ask a question that is unlikely to be asked when meeting a stranger for the first time. Frey became serious and asked why Fian remains in an almost collapsed circle that is incapable of anything, and not only he, but also the rest of the honors of the clan. With their abilities, they would be welcome in any other circle, but they remain here and scoop water from it with ladles, and Frey could not understand the reason. Isabel said that Frey was straightforward, but Fian appreciated Frey's comparison, saying that in fact everyone in the circle knew about the possibility. It would be better if the participants dispersed, but Fian said that they could not do this, because the circle would be wiped out from the face of the earth. He said that even if it is boring, the basis of the circle is respect for its founder, and none of them wants to lose their roots, their meaning in life. Honor says that in ancient times, magicians were at enmity with each other, killing each other for the sake of empty glory, but soon everything changed. However, Lucas Trowman was different. He believed that anyone associated with magic was a friend to him, and he stuck to this opinion all the time. He created a world in which all magicians are kind to each other, and Fian said that maintaining this order is the main purpose of this circle. Even though they are weak at this time, they will never give up, and will wait for the scattered forces of the Trowman circle to reunite, returning to greatness. Fian interrupted, saying that he believed Lucas would have done the same, but at the time, Frey looked at him with respect, pride, and recognition, as did Isabel. Isabel said that he should not apologize for his words, because she is sure that Lucas would be proud if he had followers like him. Fianna thought for a moment that it was not Frey who stood before him, but the great archmage Lucas Trowman, who recognized his spirit and fortitude and left it at that. After parting ways with the Fianna, Isabel and Frey go to say goodbye to Banyan and Gisellen, who wonder where the two of them will go now. Gisellen asked about it, and Banyan said that Frey asked her about the location of the basilisk tails and the rules, which surprised her. They both thought that Frey was more interested in the basilisk tails than the Trowman circle, so they went along with it. But Banyan was worried. She was worried that Frey asked her if a foreigner could apply to fight for the relic, and then left the Trowman circle. At this time, Launder Antoine, being at the base of the basilisk tail, said that they should completely drain the Trowman circle, because their relics had already been captured. Suddenly one of the group approaches him and says that some tramps have come to him and ask him to fight for the relic, and he asks him to drive them away. Antoine did not expect that these same tramps in the person of Frey and Isabel had already entered their territory, and Frey said that refusal to fight was prohibited by the rules. They shouted how dare he break their barrier, and Frey angered them by saying that he didn't notice any barrier except the insect net. At this time, Launder was thinking that Frey was not an ordinary young guy, but a magician of 6 stars, but did not even know about his real power. Launder tells him that if he is going to fight for the relic, then he must have something to put at stake, because these are the rules, and Frey must know them. Frey stuck Kungnil's dagger in front of him, saying that if he had eyes, he could guess its value for basilisk tails. After what happened, Launder stood up and approached Frey, saying that he now liked him, and Frey asked him to follow him to the place of their battle. They found themselves in a place surrounded in all directions by empty space in a cave, and Frey was asked if he knew the rules of the fight for the relic. It cannot be refused. There is a limit of 3 battles per day, and one does not have to be held responsible for killing. Frey was aware of this. Launder placed the red ring, thinking that now he will take away everything that is hidden in the hidden space from the boy when he accidentally kills him. He underestimated Frey's strength and asked Ellen Fiaxa came out against him, thinking that a warrior magician would easily deal with an ordinary magician, killing him without any problems. Ellen found out that Frey is a magician, so he decided that ignoramuses like him should die young, and he hopes to kill him with one blow, because he is a magician. However, when the fight began, Ellen simply fell to his knees, choking on the strange ice mana, losing consciousness and losing the fight before it began. Launder realized that this was a secret ice arrow technique, and it required Frey a lot of mana to use, but gave him great power. Frey started to leave, and Launder decided that he had used up almost all his mana on this attack, so he asked him not to leave and fight again. He said that Frey should not leave after one victory, increasing the bet on the fight, thinking that now he would easily win and hit the jackpot by taking all the relics from Frey. Frey grinned and said that nothing could be done, so he put down the dagger and the red ring that he had just won in the first fight. Launder asked Killer to go into battle, saying that they needed to drag out the battle, because Frey would soon run out of mana, and they would win an easy victory. Launder told him to focus all his strength on the protective barrier as soon as the battle began, and Killu added that it would not overcome his difference in experience. He said that victory would be on their side, and stood up, after which Frey said that he was tired of waiting for them to discuss their battle strategy. As soon as the fight began, Killu immediately created a barrier, putting all his energy into it at once, and Frey launched the same spell at him. The two spells met, and for a second Killu thought he had won, but Frey's attack broke through his barrier at the same moment, hitting him. The spell hit him in the stomach and he lost consciousness, after which Frey triumphantly said that this was the second time. There was only one time left. Launder became angry and decided to go into battle himself, saying that he would be his last opponent, and created a barrier, preparing to attack from the start of the fight. The fight began, and Frey immediately used his spell for the third time in a row, after which Launder decided that now he was definitely out of mana. Launder took Frey's attack, hitting the ice spear with his fist, and smashed it, thinking that now was the end, and he could easily finish off the exhausted Frey. He didn't have time to finish his thought, when suddenly ice daggers appeared around him, and he only uttered a phrase that this couldn't be. Launder was surprised by this, saying that this was a secret technique, but Frey replied that he did not understand him, because it was the most ordinary ice arrow, a second-star level spell. Launder objected that low-level magic could not be that strong, but Frey said that he was too strong, or they were too weak. Launder couldn't believe it, and ordered his group to capture the woman, and Isabel understood nothing while the basilisk tails ran towards her, standing next to Frey. Launder began to say that it was easier to kill both of them and take the relics for himself than to fight honestly, and his magicians sent a fire spell at Frey. While everyone could not believe their eyes, Frey came out of the explosion, telling Isabel that if he kills everyone here, does she know what this action will be called in that case? Having finished off the enemies with lightning, she said not to do unnecessary tasks, because in this case, it would be called self-defense, and Frey said that she answered correctly. Frey did not understand how such an idiot as Launder became a leader, and he rushes to attack, but suddenly stops after a few steps, feeling a cut on his throat. Launder realized that it was a wind cutter without casting a spell, and Frey asked him to be careful, because he could have just killed him. But after that, suddenly everyone fell to their knees, causing Frey to be surprised, because a woman came, whom everyone from the basilisk's tail, fearing, called Master Felic. Frey knew from her look that she was a master of the basilisk tail, and she said if it was too rude for their first meeting, but could not finish the words. She wanted to speak, but could not, because Frey released the pressure from his enormous power, silencing her, and asked for what purpose this circle was created. All of her subordinates screamed, but she could only kneel and responded that they must protect people from the demigods and their influence. Frey asked who the demigods were and realized that Felic Obiot knows everything perfectly, while her subordinates shouted at her about stupidity. Since she knew everything perfectly well, Frey asked why she was only concerned with building her own strength and not with her duty. After this, Frey released a mana of ice, freezing everyone alive around him in a huge radius, and Felic asked him to preserve the circle of the basilisk's tail. Frey says that he will save it if Felic gives his life, and she decides to do this, saying that if he fulfills the conditions, she will gladly do it. Frey prepared to cast the spell, and everyone started screaming, but just before the end he stopped, saying that the master wasn't that bad. Everything calmed down, and Felix remained alive. But suddenly Frey spoke, asking her to bring him everything that they took from the Trowman circle. Felix was recovering from shock, but Frey did not finish there, and asked to tell him about the nearest small and medium circles and their location. Late at night, the head of the Trowman circle was walking outside, and Giseland said that she might have a cold, but she replied that Frey was worried about her. She was worried if he could reach the basilisk's tail, but Giseland said that she would meet a better fate than him. Giseland finished his speech, and suddenly they both heard Frey say that they should not talk about love topics. They thought that Frey had left them forever, but he replied that he would not do that to them without saying anything before he left. Frey said he was just going for a light walk for the rest of the day, and they went to the main building for a discussion, inviting everyone. Sitting at the table, Banyan said that Frey wanted to tell everyone something, and he replied that he was going to wipe out the demigods from the face of the earth. He said that he cannot rely on the circles for this now, because they are all at enmity with each other and restrain each other. Frey said he wanted the Trowman circle to become the center of gravity for all circles, ruling not only the small ones, but also the three strongest ones. Banyan said it was unlikely, but Frey slammed his hand on the table and said all he wanted to hear was whether they were willing to do it. Frey continues, saying that what will follow is hellish pain, incomparable to the current state of affairs, and they will miss this time. But if they are willing to take the risk, then Frey promises to take the Trowman circle to the top of the mountain, after which he places the stolen relics of the circle on the table. Everyone was surprised, and Isabel said that Frey had already subjugated the 6 nearest middle circles, leaving them to Trowman rings. No one could believe that the young guy was able to subjugate all the small and medium clans in the area, but the evidence was in front of them. Frey said that this was not for bribery, but a reward for their efforts, which made Banyan even more surprised, because the relics had always been theirs. Frey said he was giving them a day to think, but Banyan asked him to stop, saying that time was not needed, but asked him to answer the question. She asked if it was really possible, and Frey replied that he would swear everything he had and would make it happen by putting everything he had on the line. The next morning, Banyan gathered all the members of the circle in the main square and prepared to announce something important, keeping people guessing about it. Everyone thought that now she would say that the circle was disintegrating, but she introduced everyone to the new launder, the deputy head of the circle, Frey. Frey introduced himself to everyone and said that many people might not really like the fact that such a kid became a launder of the circle. Fian thought that now Frey would explain everything to the people, but Frey said that in reality, none of them had the right to become a launder of the circle. Frey said that there were so few strong people in their circle that a young guy took the role of launder, and they should think about this situation. Frey jumped into the crowd of indignant participants, saying that he would be happy to argue with the dissatisfied, but he would sort things out in battle. Frey grinned and said that if someone could tear his clothes, he would give him the position of launder and the taipun earrings made by Lucas. The circle leaders wondered why Frey was acting this way, and Giseland said that the first reason was to test the members' power levels. Everyone was surprised by this reason, but there was a second reason, and Banyan said that he intended to take all the discontent of the circle members on himself. She thought that Frey was worried about those who had to make a difficult choice, but at this time he was only thinking about the battle, saying which of them would be the first. Pio was the first. Gunther, a magician, told Frey to change his stance, but Frey was fine with everything, and Pio got angry, saying that he would regret it. Pio said that Frey was too arrogant, but launched an attack by creating a fireball and launching it at Frey with all his power. Pio Gunther prepared for another attack, but Frey created the exact same fireball without saying a word, and collided it with the opposite one, dispelling both spells. Those around him realized that Frey had at least 6 stars, and Pio could not understand how the young guy created an identical attack in a split second without words. Everything calmed down, and Frey asked Pio Gunther what were the virtues of fire magic, which he specialized in, and answered that it was power. Frey said that his level of concentration is not bad, and his efforts are visible, but because of this, the main advantage of fire magic, its power, suffers. Frey explained to him that due to the perfect spherical shape, the magic would not become stronger, so it was better for him to focus on increasing the power. This could only be done through the knowledge of fear, the knowledge of oneself, and Frey finished the story of his glorious friend, the fire magician. Frey explained that fire magic has two sides, like good and evil, or positive and negative, and by learning both, Pio can become stronger. Frey said that when he understood the essence of fire, he would be able to imagine in his imagination the right path along which he would walk as a firebender. Pio returned to the crowd happy, and because of this, one of the circle members did not understand why he was so joyful and decided to check Launder himself. This man came out in front of Frey with a weapon, saying that realizing his weakness does not make him stronger, and now he will prove it impudently. He said that he would show Frey the right path to becoming a strong magician, but at the start of the battle, he immediately lost, flying away from a simple earth spell. Frey practiced with the circle members all day and ended in the evening having won respect in the hearts of each of them. That evening, Frey said at the meeting that in 3 months, he would raise the power of the circle to a new level, including Master Banyan and the rest of the honors. Frey informed them that in 3 months, he would make a competition between circles nearby, and Trowman would have to show his strength in it. Fian objected that this was impossible, but Frey said that everything would become possible because he promised to show them what real hell was. The next day, Frey called Banyan to the quiet place where they began their training and asked her to activate her magic. Frey said that she did deliberately create a mana room inside herself, to which Banyan replied that she was told that without it, she would not be able to cast magic. Frey explained that dragons can use mana directly from nature, and therefore it is necessary to destroy this mana room. Frey said, "First of all, you need to get rid of the mana inside her," and he poured his mana into her, causing a large wave of energy around her. Banyan fell to her knees, and Frey said that the feeling of heaviness now was a side effect of her creating the mana room. Banyan was shocked by the sensations, but remained sitting, because Frey said that he would now destroy the room, and her mana should not interfere. He poured a large amount of mana into her body, causing her to scream in pain and nearly lose consciousness, and continued spreading the mana. Frey reached the room, but did not expect it to be so dense and stable, so he was not sure whether it would hold. Frey realized that this would take a very long time, and Banyan began to whimper from the pain in her torso, but she remained confident and did not move. After a long time, Frey stopped, and Banyan collapsed, asking if he was finished, but he replied that it was today's part. Banyan asked if there would be such training, and Frey said for a whole month, which made her lose face and think that he wanted her dead. Frey responded to her words by promising to show her real hell, and she burst into tears so loudly that she could be heard in all the mountains. That same day, Frey was training with Fian, conducting a practice fight, and Fian tried to hit Frey with all his strength, but could not get through. Fian continued to strike with different parts of the body, but Frey even blocked kicks with one hand. Fian did not give up and decided to throw a hail of blows with his fists, but when he threw them, he felt as if he was hitting a rock. After the last blow, Frey told him to stop, adding that his skills were worse than that of a second-rate magician. Frey realized that he had hurt the pride of the Fianna, so he is confident that he can make it stronger than it is now. Fian had a common fighting technique called the 100 Kings blows, and Frey said it sounded stupid. Frey said that his technique is impeccable, but he is too weak, so he cannot determine the weaknesses of his opponents. Fian asked him how he could become stronger, and Frey said that there are no shortcuts, one must take it gradually. Frey said he will have to climb each step, but he will help speed up the process. After these words, Frey began training, and after a while Fian was already lying on the floor, tearfully begging for a break. Fian asked to be killed, but Frey said that he needed to get up and finish the second half of the training, stopping pretending. Having finished with the Fianna, Frey began training with Honor Gisellen, and when they had both finished, Frey handed him the dagger. Frey told him to now use it, the dagger of Kung Neil, an artifact from the Age of Light, in battle. Gisellen wanted to argue that the magician did not need a dagger, but Frey said that he understood that he had used the sword in battles for a long time by his calluses. Frey said that despite the fact that he now has 5 stars, Gisellen will be able to quickly develop thanks to this dagger, and asks to use it and become a swordsman. Gisellen said that he would try, but he was not very confident in himself, to which Frey asked not to worry, because he would take care of self-confidence. At the end of the day, when all the training was over, Honor Gizelan, exhausted, returned to the building and saw Fianna lying on the table, looking barely alive. Gizelan could not reach the table and fell in front of him, saying that his hands did not move, and Banyan came for him, having heard his words. However, she also had difficulty moving her limbs, saying that Frey had been rummaging through her stomach all day, and she fell exhausted along with them. When they finished speaking languidly, Frey entered the room, saying that they could eat and go to evening training. Frey did not understand why they were all lying down and asked if they really felt bad, and they unanimously thought that it was his fault. At this time, a man entered the main building, saying that he had returned after completing a mission, but he saw Frey at the entrance and froze. Honor Isaac decided that Frey was an assassin and prepared to attack him because he was not even armed. Banyan could not stop Honor because she did not have the strength to say a word, and he struck Frey with his sword, hitting the barrier. Isaac put even more force into the attack, but Frey noticed Professor Adelia behind him and greeted her sweetly. Banyan found strength and explained that Isaac is the one she sent to another place because of the assignment, and he has only returned now. Banyan could not get up, but introduced Frey to Isega, saying that he was the new launder and Isabel was his assistant. Isaac was surprised that such young students were already leaders of the circle, and Adelia screamed when she heard that Frey had become a launder. Isaac apologized to Frey for being rude the first time they met by shaking his hand, and Frey said he would have done the same if he had been in that situation. Adelia asked Frey what made him become a launder, and Frey replied that it happened because of a coincidence. But suddenly he realized something. Frey called the professor simply by his first name, adding that he was now higher in rank than her, and Adelia became angry, starting to scream and hit him. Isaac said that when he went on a mission to find the successor to the king of warrior mages, they discovered clues near Reynolds de Milim. Having found his location, Isaac and the group tracked down and caught up with him, and after these words, everyone at the table froze in anticipation of the next phrase. Isaac took off his cape and showed a huge diagonal scar across his torso, saying that he was not in the mood to join the Trowman circle. The head of the circle and all the honors opened their eyes in surprise at Isaac's scar, and he added that the successor knew about the demigods, but he was not interested in them. Even Frey wrinkled his face and bit his lip when he heard that the successor was only interested in testing the magical effect and nothing more. Isaac put the cape back on and finished the story, and Frey asked Isabel how long the journey from here to Reynolds de Milim would take. Isabel thought and said that the road from Grod on the way to move to Fila, using teleportation, would take at least 3 days. Frey thought about the city of Filat, and realized that this was the place where his relatives, the Blake family, lived, and decided to take a risk and stood up from the table. Standing up, Frey attracted the attention of everyone at the table and said that he would go and meet with the successor of the king of warrior magicians, surprising Isaac. Isaac objected, saying that it was dangerous, but Banyan, to his surprise, calmly asked him when he was leaving and asked him to be careful. Isaac wondered why Banyan trusted him so much, but he released Frey and he went to his room with Isabel to talk. Frey started to speak, but Isabel interrupted him, saying that she knew that Frey was going to go on this journey alone. Frey said that he wanted her to stay here because the foundation in the circle, laid so quickly, was still unstable and could collapse. Isabel got out of bed and approached him, telling him that he need not worry because she would take his place while he was busy with other things. Isabel turned her back to him and was about to leave, but told him to be sure to send her news about himself more often. Frey, smiling, said that Isabel had grown a lot during this time, but noticed that she began to cry and, becoming serious, thanked her for this. Frey finished his conversation with Isabel late at night. Immediately after that, he went to Banyan and Honor to say goodbye before leaving. Frey left the building, but was surprised because the circle members lined up in front of the door, saying that they didn't want Frey to leave them so early. However, Frey replied that after he left, Isabel would replace him, showing them her true character, so much so that they would forget even Frey's training. Everyone began to shed tears, but Frey said that in a month friendly battles would begin, and if anyone from Trowman's circle lost, he would not be happy. After his words, everyone around shouted in desire for victory, expressing their readiness to fight, and Frey raised his fist in agreement and support. At the same time, a girl with long red hair woke up next to Torkuda's dried corpse, not understanding why she was still alive. The naked girl was the Phoenix, reborn in a new body after being defeated in a battle with Torkuda, the 1,000-year-old king of the Drakes. She remembers how, before her death, she heard Frey's words that she should defend Shuhei's dungeon from the second and third Torkuda. Frey's phrases sank deep into her consciousness, and she flew into the air, thanks to her fiery manner, flying in search of new power. The next morning, Frey was already in the city of Grod, which was a kind of transition between two large cities around. Frey had not slept all night, and was now standing at the mirror, but suddenly he concentrated mana in his palms and washed his entire face and hair with it. After that, he suddenly turned into another person with a new face, Kane Ligston, a C-rank mercenary, even changing his hair color. This man was 26 years old, a 3-star mage, and Frey had previously asked Iseg for the mercenary ID of this man's guild. Frey explained to Iseg that the territory of the city of Filar belonged to his family, so he needed a different identity to avoid conflicts with his father. Frey, in the body of Kane Ligston, walked through the security post at the entrance to another city and confirmed his new identity, after which he was allowed through. The view of his hometown appeared before Frey, and long-standing feelings for the forgotten city began to revive in Frey's body. While local alcoholics were discussing the taste of the cooking in the guild dining room, Frey came there on important business, in the body of Kane Ligston. Frey walked up to the counter, wondering about his next move, and the girl behind the counter asked him what Frey would order. Frey remembers that Iseg advised him to join the cart in order to get there faster, to save his strength and his time, and Frey thought about it. Iseg said that it would be better to join a group of traders with the elves in the depths of the mountains, but they only recruit high-quality mercenaries and return to reality. Frey realized that he needed to become a security guard for them and told the girl behind the counter that he had come for a job, holding out his C-rank ID. The girl asked what kind of job he wanted, and Frey replied that he wanted to be a guard for the merchants going to Reynolds de Milim. Frey learned that only mercenaries higher than C-rank could accompany such merchants, so he asked if he could take the rank-up exam now. The girl explained that it was possible, but the registration fee would cost 10 silver, after which Frey would lead her to follow her. They walked down the stairs and down several long corridors, before ending up in a room where a man with an eye patch sat on a cross. The girl said that this person hopes to increase the level, to which the head said that Irene could deal with this herself. Irene began to explain that they could increase their rank by completing an assignment, or by confirming it on the spot, right in front of them, showing their strength and resilience. Irene also added that none of the candidates over the past 10 years have managed to get confirmed because they are very picky about people. She asked what he would do, but Frey immediately replied that he was choosing confirmation because he did not have time to carry out a stupid assignment. The head of the guild was a little surprised, but said that such an interesting mercenary as Kane Ligston had not come to them for quite a long time. They moved into a cube-shaped room, and Irene was about to explain everything, but Frey asked first if he should just defeat them together. Irene said that he just needed to hit the wall with his magic, because it was strengthened by a 5-star mage, and even the head of the guild was unlikely to break through it. Frey found out from the head what rank he was, and asked that if he breaks the wall of magic, he will also become A rank, or he will be given another one. They both stood there for a few seconds, perplexed, but suddenly they burst into laughter, and Irene called Kane cute because it was a funny joke. Frey continued to wait, and suddenly asked them that if they were done laughing, then let them move, and then stared at the wall in front of their faces. Irene finished laughing, and she and the head moved away from the wall not far, and Frey suddenly began to cast a fireball, the spell of the 5th star. Irene screamed that the magic was too strong, and the head was already shouting at her to lie down on the ground, but Frey finished the spell and launched a fireball at the wall. The spell ended, and everyone saw a hole in the wall, 3 times higher than Kane, and Irene and the head shouted that they recognized him and congratulated him on his A rank. After this, the leader introduced himself as Domke and invited Kane to join the mercenary group, but he refused and said that he would not do so. Domke asked what was the reason for such an urgent promotion, And then Irene explained that he needed to protect the cart in Reynolds. The head of Domka said that Kane's abilities could be trusted, so he would put in a good word about him with the people associated with the campaign. In the guild tavern, the mercenaries were talking about Frey Blake, saying that he had been in office for 2 months and would soon retire. Since the heads of the towers need to be on duty at all times, this is not surprising. And then Frey, in the body of Kane, joins the conversation, welcoming the mercenaries to the table. Frey pushed back his chair and said that he would like to listen to them talk about the darkness of the mercenary world, since he had not been in it very long. The mercenaries did not approve of this, but Frey sat down at the table and said that he was treating them today, and the men replied that this kid already knew the basics. Frey ordered more beer and snacks, and after the meal he said that he would like to get a job as a security guard for the Blake family, because it was stable and paid a lot. Frey asked them to tell them about the Blake family, and one of the mercenaries said that Hans saw carts approaching the estate, but this was a common occurrence. But the mercenary added that there were too many carts for them, and human screams could be heard from them, as if someone was screaming, and Frey fell silent. Later the men went home, and Frey sat alone at the bar, where the guild tavern was already empty, and recalled the conversation. Frey realized that it was for a sacrifice, and the head of the guard heading to Reynolds de Millem approached him and met Kane. Alcon, the head of the security, said that Domke combed his ears, telling him about Kane's talent, and Frey could only silently agree with him. Alcon told him that in the last campaign to Damilim, everyone who was heading there died, and Frey asked whose hands it was. Alcon said that this was most likely done by the immortals, who often began to appear on the mainland, and this is not such good news. Frey thought that it was strange for immortals to appear in front of others, because they were driven only by hatred of the living, as happened on Cortesio. But he pushed the thoughts away, deciding that there was no point in thinking about it now, and it would be better to focus on the important things in front of him. Frey, with the face of Kane, set off on a journey on carts, and sitting in one of them, he noticed a strange old man with green hair opposite him. At first he was worried that such an old man should not have accompanied the carts, but then he stopped caring about it, because everyone has their own reasons. The head of Alcon entered the cart at that moment, and Frey said that everything was in order, but the head warned that after entering the forest, everything would go differently. Frey asked Alcon about the old man, and he said that in fact it was the second rank, a mercenary, a 5-star mage, Shiax, accompanying them to the forest. Alcon also said that in mercenary circles, he is called Shiax of the Green Wind because he is quite famous, and Frey thought that this suited him. Before finally entering the forest, the trip group stopped on a small plain and set up a temporary camp to sleep. Frey was eating food that was being cooked over the fires, and suddenly Shiax approached him, asking him to sit next to him, and Kane did not refuse. It was clear that Shiax wanted to talk, but when he sat down, he said that he was sorry for Kane's meal being so unpleasantly interrupted. Shiax asked Kane if he was a summoner by chance, and explained that he felt the energy of some very rare spirit from him. Frey learned that Shiax was a summoner himself, but replied that even though he, Kane, had signed a contract with the spirit, he was still not a summoner, but a magician. Frey asked Shiax how he knew that Frey was connected to the spirits, but said that he didn't have to answer, but then he had to tell him something. Shiax said that he became interested in the immortals because they had not appeared in the Reynolds de Millema region for more than 2,000 years. Frey told him that he spoke as if he had lived several thousand years, and advised him to finish the cold soup because Shiax hesitated at his words. And suddenly, Frey realized that Shiax also uses illusory magic, but not like Frey to hide his identity, but for some other reason. Suddenly, a mercenary comes running to the head of Alcon and says that a group of immortals has appeared in the direction where they were going to go. The leader asked Kane and Shiax that they would all need to go on reconnaissance, so they needed to enchant the blades of all members of the escort. Frey did not refuse, and in the meantime he felt the power of the demigod. But it was not a demigod, but only his superficial power, so he decided not to think about it. Kane, Ligston, and Shiax finished enchanting the warriors' weapons, and a small reconnaissance group headed straight into the forest. Walking forward, someone smelled something rotten, and the group noticed immortals ahead, so they all immediately rushed to run straight there. However, as soon as everyone ran out of the trees, they saw scattered and no longer living corpses in front of them. someone had defeated all the undead. The guy who called the whole group to this place said that half an hour ago, all the undead were alive and ready to fight, and Kane sat down close to one corpse. Frey suddenly said that all this disgrace was caused by one person, and it took him less than 10 minutes to kill them all. Frey continued to examine the corpse of the undead in front of him, and suddenly found a sign that this was definitely arranged by the successor of the King of Warrior Mages, Kasajin. The entire reconnaissance team heard the sounds of battle ahead of them, and Alcon began to tremble in fear. But then Frey finished his inspection and said that they needed to move on. The group moved forward, and at this time the same successor of Kasajin fought with the Immortals, who attacked him in droves incessantly. But the reconnaissance group reached him only at the moment when they could see even more corpses around and a warrior standing in the middle of them. The head of Alcon gained determination and asked this man who he was and why he killed all the Immortals who were in the area. But the man who killed the undead was not in the mood for dialogue and replied that if they did not get away from him, he would kill them all at the same time. Frey was convinced that this was definitely Kasajin's successor, and told Alcon that under no circumstances should they let him go further alone. Alcon said that they did not have enough strength for this, but Kane immediately offered him that he should go after this man alone, and Alcon refused. The head said that he would not allow him to do this, but Frey flew into the air and said that he would return as soon as he could and provide a detailed report on everything. Still in the same forest, but deeper in it, the successor of the warrior mage fought with the Immortals, who had no end or edge in this forest. One of the monsters survived his crushing blows and tried to bite him, but when his teeth collided with the skin, they broke off from its hardness. He defeated the last Immortal in sight, but suddenly noticed a man standing near a tree who had been watching him all this time. Frey said that his skills were not bad for the fact that he had recently begun to study Kasajin's art of battle, but he was not in the mood for dialogue. The successor asked Frey if he was from the Circle, and Frey said that in a nutshell it was, but before he could finish speaking, a melee attack flew at him. Frey blocked the attack with a barrier, and the successor said that he promised Ice Edge to kill whoever came to him again from the Trowman Circle. He grabbed Frey by the clothes and lifted him into the air, saying that he had better leave him alone, because he was not going to mess with the mongrels from the circles. Frey told him that it was quite strange that a man who had taken over the power of the warrior mage king Kasajin did not want to get involved with the demigods, but the successor only became angrier, saying that he would not enter the pigsty, where everyone had forgotten about their goal and was only filling their bellies with pleasure. Frey agreed with him, because now all circles are busy with civil strife and the fight for money, but not with the fight against the demigods, having forgotten about their purpose. He said that for this reason he would change the circles, concentrating power in one of them, updating the entire system and ending the corruption in them. The successor pushed Frey away and said that this time he had come across an interesting guy, so he decided to check whether he had the ability to implement his business. But Frey was only glad of this, because the introduction lasted too long, and mold was about to bloom on his beautiful fists from idleness. Frey managed to finish his sentence, and the successor hit his fist on the ground where Frey had just stood, who now soared into the air, higher from him. Dodging the attack, Frey began to fly along tree trunks, accelerating with the help of mana, and Kasajin's successor broke all the trees, announcing himself. Frey soared into the sky again, beginning to create a spell of ice spears in one hand and a storm wind in the other, and launched them all at him. However, Kasajin's successor was not happy. He broke Frey's spells with regular punches, moving closer and closer to him. Saying that he was stubborn just like Kasajin in the past, Frey created a frost breath spell, and grabbing his successor's legs, launched it at him. The high-level spell hit the enemy right on target, but Kasajin's successor managed to put his hands in the shape of a shield, creating a stone shield spell. Frey went below ground while the successor was completely frozen and turned into living ice due to a spell, and Frey asked him to talk to him. But as soon as Frey finished his request, the successor awoke and broke the ice with sheer effort, after which he resumed the fight. Frey barely had time to move before Kasajin's successor attacked him, preparing to punch him square in the face with a huge fist, shouting that he had finally caught him. But Frey remained vigilant and was able to parry his attack, taking him to the ground without much difficulty, remaining untouched from the very beginning of the fight. Kasajin's successor realized that this was the bull rush technique taught by the king of warrior mages and asked how Frey knew it, lying on the ground. Frey grinned and asked if he wanted to continue their conversation, extending his hand to him, but he stood up himself, deliberately touching Frey's chin. The successor did not notice this and simply started running towards the forest, and Frey ran after him, saying that he was a complete idiot. Frey caught up with him in speed and realized that his successor was leading him somewhere, but he, in turn, thought that Frey was too strange. The successor said that this method of movement is one of Kasajin's powers, like the bullpen, and asked how Frey knew these techniques. Frey said that he would leave all questions to his imagination, and asked his name, learning that the successor was called Ivan, and they ran on together. Eventually, they continued running and reached the point where Ivan stopped, and that was in front of an old, broken and overgrown building. Frey said that Ivan, it turns out, was heading home, but he suddenly took a full lungful of air and shouted that he had arrived, telling this to Rika. Frey asked him to warn him about this, but Ivan replied that if he spoke more quietly, he would not respond, and Frey did not understand him at first. Frey asked who he was calling. Ivan replied that he was calling Ricky, and Frey clarified who he was, to which he suddenly learned that Ricky was a demigod, dumbfounded by what he heard. Frey asked Ivan again, but he only grinned, and suddenly a tall, white-haired figure of a man came out of the house, asking that Ivan had brought a friend with him. Frey froze, realizing that the same energy was emanating from the figure in front as from the demigod, and Ricky's energy was at the level of the apocalypse. Rika's energy was higher than that of the poison apocalypse, and at this time, Ivan said that Frey came to him from the circle, and he decided to bring him with him. Ricky asked Ivan if he had completed everything that was asked of him, and Ivan replied that everything was completed, so Rika called them to come into the room, saying that it was time to move on to the next stage. Ricky called Frey to come with them, driving him into even greater shock. Frey stopped standing still and grabbed Ivan's clothes with his fist, asking him why Kasajin's successor had joined hands with the demigod. Frey said that he would not let him go because, depending on his answer, he could kill him even right now in the same place. Ivan smirked, saying he could try but brushed Frey aside, turning around and saying that the reason for his collaboration with Ricky was obvious. Ivan waited until Frey recovered from his state of shock and said that Ricky was a traitor and his goal was to destroy all demigods. Frey said that he didn't believe him, and Ivan replied that Frey had the right not to believe, but he could find out everything if he walked with him and listened to Ricky. Frey had no other choice, and he and Ivan entered the building, but inside it turned out to be many times larger thanks to the magic of space distortion. Ivan asked what it was as they walked, and Frey said that this magic distorts time and space, increasing the size of the territory tenfold. Frey said this is an incredible ability, because a person without clearance would not even be able to identify the location. They reached the room along the same length corridor and saw Ricky sitting on the floor, calmly peeling fruit with a knife. Ricky asked them to sit down too, and Ivan said that he was surprised that Ricky let Frey in here so easily. But he pointed out one small thing to him. Ricky said that after looking at Frey, he realized that such a look would not appear on a person who had lived less than 100 years. So Ivan brought an interesting person. Frey did not pay attention to his words and asked if he had betrayed the demigods, and having received confirmation, asked why he did so, but Ricky avoided answering. Ricky said that he did not need to know this, because he called Frey not to gain trust, but so that Frey would help him in his plans. Ricky said that if you kill the apostle, his demigod will go into hibernation, and Frey felt uneasy from these words. He could not comprehend them immediately. Ricky added that during his hibernation, the demigod could be killed even by simply cutting his throat, and Frey thought that this idiot was talking some kind of nonsense. Frey learned that an apostle was roaming the area, so Ivan destroyed the immortals he had made, thereby inciting the apostle to come out of the shadows. Ricky said that the apostle was somewhere here in Reynolds de Millim, and Frey, hearing these words, made several guesses about who it could be. Ricky confirmed his guess, saying that this was the High Elf, Oidine Friedekud, an apostle of the demigod who rules death, Nozdok. Frey realized that his task was to defeat the apostle, and Ricky would kill the demigod, who fell asleep at that moment. And Ricky said that Frey was quite smart. Frey agreed with Rika, adding that he was much more incredulous than Ivan, and at that moment he became angry frowning at the double bullying. Frey asked Ricky why he didn't act on his own, because he had enough strength to deal with the apostle, expressing his suspicions. Ricky said that it would be too noticeable, because the apostle's consciousness is connected with the consciousness of his demigod, and if he kills him, Ricky could easily be exposed. Frey began to sweat on his face, because a demigod could be killed so easily in hibernation, when he himself had the power to destroy an entire city. While Frey was hovering in his thoughts, Ivan said that everything was actually very simple, because their task was to kill a simple apostle. Frey said that it would not be as easy as it seems, because once he had already defeated the apostle controlling lightning, and Ricky suddenly spoke. Ricky asked if it was true that he killed Indra's apostle, the demigod of lightning, and Frey said that it was true, and began to look for something in the bag. Frey found a clot filled with lightning energy obtained from the crystal as evidence for Ricky, and he confirmed that it was Indra's lightning. Ricky said that such energy can only be obtained by killing the apostle, so he began to trust Frey and picked up the sword from the stand. Ricky stood up and said that he would be back soon, and struck the air in front of him with his sword, cutting the space and opening a passage to another place. After Ricky went into the portal, it closed behind him, and Frey was left alone with Ivan, asking where Ricky had gone, but Ivan replied that he should be back soon. They continued to sit like this for a few more seconds, and suddenly the portal opened again, and Ricky immediately jumped out of it, holding Indra's head in his hands. Frey was very shocked to see Indra's head in Ricky's hands, and wondered how it was so easy to kill a strong demigod, but Ricky said that it was easy. Ricky said that he and Frey had the same goals and understood each other well, so he had no reason not to join forces with him. Ricky sat down in his original place and began to do the important job of cutting Indra's head into small cubes so that his power would disappear forever. Frey asked why the demigods would create apostles if their powers were no match for the original demigod's power, putting themselves in danger. Ricky said that they had no choice but to reduce this risk, and explained that the demigods had destroyed too many lives over the past 1,000 years. Ricky also added that the demigod family thinks differently, and because of these actions, they can all disappear from the face of the earth forever. Frey chuckled, answering that demigods are not so easy to wipe out from the face of the earth, but Ricky said that God is capable of this, and Frey's jaw dropped. Ricky explained that God is the great law that governs this world, and not the omnipotent one that people think of first after the word God. God is like a perfect clot of energy in the universe, maintaining balance in the world, and the demigods are just particles separated from it. Frey listened to this and said that if the demigod had not explained this to him, he would have thought that they were trying to lure him into some new religion. Ivan asked if at least one demigod had ever disappeared, and Ricky said that not one, but as many as 20 demigods had recently disappeared forever. Ricky said that that was all, and in a month they would meet at a meeting of demigods, where even all 5 apocalypses would be present. Ricky added that before this meeting they must have time to destroy Odin, but in response to Frey's question, he asked them to eat the apple that he had been peeling for a long time. Ricky began to explain that the meeting would be a purge of traitors, and over the past decades he had gotten rid of many demigods, and he might come under suspicion. Ricky said that all the demigods and their apostles will be there, and of course there will be Odin, but after the meeting he and his apostle Nozdok can hide. If Odin and Nozdok go into the shadows, then Ricky will no longer have the opportunity to find and get rid of them, so they should hurry up with this matter. Ivan asked them not to speak in such a complicated language, so he asked them again that now was their only chance to destroy the apostle Nozdok. Frey replied that to do this, they would need to get to Raynol's de Millum, but Ivan replied that he knew the way because Frey could fly. Ivan said that they could fly into it from above, but Frey replied that even if they dug a tunnel, they would be enemies to the elves inside. Ivan hesitated, saying that they would have to avoid getting caught, but Frey told Ricky that with a man like Ivan, he could not carry out his plan. Frey began to explain that in the high elf village there was a tree at the center of the world that supported Raynol's de Millum, and the elf goddess was connected to it and all the other trees. Frey asked how many seconds it would take them to identify the enemies in this case, and Ivan cried out that he had no other plan, and it was not his fault. Frey couldn't blame Ivan for his obvious stupidity, but he suddenly realized that they actually had a better plan, remembering the traders' carts in the forest. At this time, These same merchants set up camp in front of the village because people could not go inside Reynolds de Milima, and they didn't really want to. The men were talking about how, thanks to the large warrior, they were lucky not to meet the immortals. And at that time, Shiax left the forest while no one was looking. The head of the security came and said that everyone had worked hard, and tomorrow the deal with the elves would take place. But these words made Shiax want to retire even faster. Shiax went into the forest and transformed into his real form, cancelling the illusory magic, and began to peer and listen attentively to the elven forest. He realized that in such a situation, if immortals continued to appear, then this place would end. But suddenly he heard a noise behind him. Shiax put the illusory magic back on his face and met Cain Ligston, who came out of the bushes with a strange face, praising that he had returned. Cain continued to remain silent, but suddenly Ivan came out of the bushes and asked him if this was the old man who could lead them to Reynolds de Milim. Shiax didn't understand what was starting to happen, and Ivan approached him, shouting for this old man to quickly escort the two of them to Reynolds de Milim. Then Frey joined in, pushing Ivan away with his hand, and gently asked to lead them there. But Shiax replied that Cain should first show respect to the elders. Frey grabbed him by the shoulders and said that now was not the time for a show. This matter was important to both him and Shiax, so he should agree. Frey removed his illusory magic and revealed his true face, saying that from the very beginning he knew that Shiax was a high elf, but now he asked him for help. Shiax looked at Frey for a few seconds, but then revealed his true form as a graceful elf, saying that she couldn't wait to know what he was talking about. Ivan was only worried about the fact that Shiax turned out to be a young elf, looking like a small doll, and not a decrepit old man, and he turned pale at this. Frey asked Shiax what she knew about the demigods, and she guessed that Frey was leading to the fact that the apostle created these immortals in the forest. This necromancer, who is most likely an apostle, is located in Reynolds de Milim, so it is dangerous to leave the situation like this. Shiax did not believe Frey, saying that this was impossible, because as soon as someone from the outside appears there, the goddess will immediately know about it. Frey agreed with her, saying that it was so, but this apostle was different from the others, but suddenly thought about his further words. Frey remembered how Ricky said that she was the same high elf as Oideen, so there was no point in talking about the apostle yet. Frey told Shiax that there was no time to explain the details of the apostle, but assured her that only he was capable of tracking him down. Shiax agreed with him, but asked him to answer the question of how he learned to use spiritual magic if he was not an elf. Frey said that the dark elf taught him, and Shiax screamed, "What is beyond reality? Because the dark elves are hidden from society even more than she is." Frey said they didn't seem closed off to him, and Camilla was generally very good at communicating with other races. Shiax recognized her, and was surprised how the panther Camilla herself recognized an ordinary person, because she is the strongest among the elves. Shiax realized that Frey was not so simple, so she agreed and told him that she would believe them and take them to Reynolds de Milim now. At this time, the elf sitting on the throne used strange magic and asked out loud what the trouble was about, and suddenly the room became darker. A spirit in the shape of a skull appeared, and told the elf that Indra had died, and the killer again left no trace of himself. The elf asked if the same traitor had done this, and the spirit replied that now he should be careful before the meeting, and asked him to remember this. The elf replied that he would do as the spirit wanted, but suddenly there was a knock on the room, and the elf had to interrupt his magic. A servant entered the room when the spirit disappeared, and he warned Oideen that he was suddenly being summoned by her grace the goddess. Oideen looked calm, sitting in the chair, and answered the servant that he should tell him that he would come to her right away. But after that, he became thoughtful. He remembered the words of the spirit, and said that it was unlikely that there would be a fool in Damilim who would decide to threaten him, the elder brother of the elf queen. At this time, Frey, Shiax, and Ivan walked along the root of the tree, seeing in front of them the entire city of the elves, Reynolds de Milim, and they stopped. Ivan said that the tree of the world is indeed huge, and Shiax replied that the elves call it Hruhiral, adding that the pronunciation is from the language of the elves. Having finished the conversation here, they went down the huge route to the entrance gate to the city, and were met by the elf guard, who greeted Shiax. The guard identified herself as Fifin, and asked Shiax why she was delayed. but she replied that circumstances required it. Ivan said that he didn't understand a word of Elvish, and at that moment Fifin turned and noticed them, forgetting about the topic of conversation with Shayax. Fifin asked who these two were, and Shayax replied that she was collaborating with these people to track down the necromancer who was creating immortals in the forest. Shayax added that they are her comrades who helped her in attacking the traces of the necromancer, so they are harmless to the city. Fifin said that even then, they would need to have an audience with the goddess before doing so she would send a request, and Shayax thanked her. Ivan was tired of enduring misunderstandings and asked how everything was going, but Shayax replied that they needed to greet the goddess, they would immediately go to her. Ivan relaxed and moved on, as Shayax continued to say that the two of them had actually had a much easier time than expected. But suddenly, she fell silent, and all three stopped, after which Ivan asked her about the reason for stopping, whether she wanted to go to the toilet. She began to say that although the audience with the Elf Queen would not last long, she broke off there, suddenly turning to the relaxed Ivan. She screamed for them to behave decently, but Ivan told her that she didn't even have to worry about it, because everything would be fine. Ivan only smugly said that these were her prejudices, because Kasajin's technique develops not only the body, but also the mind, and he is actually well educated. Ivan happily walked forward, and Shayax said that she had a feeling of anxiety that she could not get rid of. Frey told her that Ivan is a complete copy of Kasajin, so she shouldn't worry, because when he sees a woman he will freeze like stone. They reached the palace and entered the audience hall, after which they saw elves sitting in the hall, waving sheets for air dynamics. Suddenly the queen rose from her throne, introducing herself as Snow de Fridikwood, the goddess of all elves, and welcomed the foreign guests to her city. The elf queen was so beautiful that Ivan literally froze in place and turned to stone, surprising Frey and Shayax. They stopped wondering what happened to Ivan and heard Snow de Fridikwood greet them again. Frey realized that she had the same last name as the apostle, which means he was her blood relative, but was surprised that the queen was not a high elf, which was strange. Shayax listened to the goddess and stepped forward, kneeling and saying that Anril's first daughter, Shayax, had requested an audience with her. She said that the people behind her were helping her with the necromancer, so they needed to stay here for a couple of days until the next time they left. Shayax said that Her Majesty also speaks human language well, but Ivan could not introduce himself because he froze like a stone in place. At this time, Ivan was only thinking about how graceful this elf was, how refined her movements were, and words were simply not enough to describe her. Ivan couldn't stop looking at her. Shayax now looked like a goblin, and at that moment, Shayax asked Ivan to quickly introduce himself. Ivan heard her and hesitated, but as soon as he looked at the goddess, his thoughts became confused, and she did not allow him to pull himself together. Ivan decided that as a man walking the path of a warrior, he must gather his strength, and he crossed his arms and closed his eyes so as not to see her face, surprising Shayax. Frey thought that Ivan was trying very hard, but suddenly one of the queen's close associates shouted that this was extremely disrespectful towards the goddess. He said that a man should not behave like that here, but the queen asked him to be silent by raising her hand and heard familiar words. Frey knelt and said the words that all elven magicians say before the queen, and said that he was a magician Frey from the Kastkar Empire. The queen was surprised by this, saying that although he is of human origin, he knows elven etiquette well, praising Frey. Queen Snow de Fridikwood approved their stay here until they were fully restored before their upcoming journey. Shayax began to sweat on her face and said that she would do everything right, after which the three of them left the audience chamber. Frey and Ivan came to Shayax's room, and Ivan saw a basket of greens on the table and asked what it was, learning that it was Shayax who prepared dinner for them. Ivan's eyes widened, saying that even goats eat better, and Frey replied that he should not have expected meat ribs in the elf village. Frey took out dried meat from a pouch behind his back, saying that Ivan could eat it, and Ivan thanked Frey for this. Ivan asked where Shayax went after leaving here, and Frey replied that she had a lot to report on, and added that greens for dinner cleared the head. Frey began to speak telepathically using mana, but Ivan replied that it would be better if he spoke with words, and Frey called him a fool. Frey explained to him that everything was going more difficult than it should, and now he was being watched by elves whose hearing was tens of times stronger than that of a human. Ivan asked telepathically if Oidin is a relative of the queen. They have problems, and Frey replied that this is the main problem because they have no evidence. Frey said that if they just started interrogating him, they would become enemies of the entire city. But Ricky said something about this earlier. Frey said Oidin needs to communicate with the demigod through an intermediary often, so they must sense the holy power and find an intermediary. Ivan asked how long they would have to sit back and wait, and Frey replied that Oidin should contact the demigod tomorrow. This is due to the fact that Ivan has been killing immortals for a week now, and Oidin is addicted to killing, like the devil. And Ivan, as luck would have it, interfered with him. Frey said that a blood-starved beast would not be able to survive more than 2 days in a village where only grass smelled without killing. At that moment, they interrupted the dialogue via telepathy, because Shiax came into the house looking tired, and Frey asked what happened to her. Shiax said that she walked around the village all night reporting, and could not sleep a minute that night. She fell onto the bed with her face in the pillow, and Ivan said that she was too careless, but Frey replied that Shiax treated them like pets. Frey stood up from the table, telling Ivan via telepathy that he needed to leave for a while, but he objected, saying that after eating it was time to fight. Frey said that he had a request to Ivan. He needed to send a message to his friend, and he left the city beyond the walls, sitting on the ground near the wall. Frey sat in the lotus position and began to concentrate mana in his body, creating a copy of himself and separating his consciousness from his body, and flew into the sky. Frey increased his concentration and detailed his mana copy, going to Hruhiral, the tree that supports the entire world, with a purpose. He thought that that man should know what happened 4,000 years ago to his friends, should know what Frey himself was missing. As soon as Frey entered the world of the soul of the tree, he was transformed into his original appearance, feeling at ease again in his own body. He lost himself in his thoughts, but a beautiful girl interrupted him, saying that she had been waiting for him for a long time, and should she call him Lucas or Frey, surprising him. The girl told Lucas that she was pleased to meet him and her name was Hruhiral, but suddenly she began to cry, feigning sadness and disappointment. She said that Lucas had endured great difficulties, loneliness, having come an extremely long way, endured what others could not bear, and held on with dignity. Lucas couldn't answer, feeling a weight on his shoulders, and Hruhiral asked him that Lucas wanted to ask her something. She said that although she was limited by the powers of the demigod of their kind, she would try to help Lucas in any way she could. Lucas said that he wants to know about the last minutes of his friends' lives, because Hruhiral should know about everything, because she is connected with lands all over the world. Hruhiral listened to him silently and closed her eyes, moving them to the stone room, saying that this would be quite a long story. Lucas was surprised and sat down at the table, where she was already pouring tea for them, and Hruhiral said that Kasajin, the warrior mage, met his end in the Amakan desert. She explained that after fighting the demigod for over a week, the two of them disappeared together, and it was truly an incredible battle. Lucas said that it was very similar to him, and Hruhiral added that the swordmaster Rushid died along with his homeland, Ecolium. Lucas replied that he wanted to know about Shuhei's death, but Hruhiral said that it was better for him not to know. But Lucas had already taken the path against the demigods. Lucas said that no matter what the reality was, he couldn't miss anything, and she replied that she could see how Lucas had prepared for all of this. Hruhiral said that in this case, it would be better for Lucas to see everything with his own eyes, so that there are no prejudices left. Lucas felt his consciousness being transported to another place, and he found himself in the midst of rock debris surrounding him. Frey heard the voice of Shuhei, who was lying behind him dying, saying that he did not expect that she would actually turn out to be a traitor. Shuhei said that he now realized why the relationship between Kasajin and Rushid deteriorated so badly so quickly. Lucas couldn't figure out who he was talking about, but suddenly a strange figure appeared behind him, and he saw Iris Fizban in front of him. She grinned and giggled, telling Shuhei to stop making her laugh, because in fact, he didn't believe her for a second. Shuhei replied that he did not believe, but Lucas trusted her, but she replied that she also believed, but not everyone, but only Lucas. Shuhei said that Iris betrayed Lucas's dream by associating with the hated demigods, but she replied that in the end they all brought him to his end in the same way. Shuhei asked if she was offended, But Iris said not at all, but she was very angry that Shuhei decided to take Lucas's place. Shuhei said that she was right, because he did not have enough strength for such a difficult role, and Iris laughed at his calmness. However, Shuhei only remained silent, sighing heavily from his injuries, and asked Iris why she teamed up with the demigods. Lucas, who was watching this, his eyes widened from this outcome, and Shuhei said that his death was for the best, because if he saw this, he would be very disappointed. Iris continued to stand until this moment, but after saying that Lucas was dead, she screamed at Shuhei, saying that Lucas was not dead, biting her lips. She stopped her anger and smiled, as she created spears from mana and said that she was sorry that she had to end Shuhei by shooting all the spears at him. Iris asked him not to worry and to have a good rest, because she would make Lucas's dream come true, and he screamed in his head. Iris began to leave, saying that in this era it is impossible to resist the demigods, and they need to wait, perhaps even 4,000 years. Iris ended up saying that they needed to wait until they were cornered enough, and Shuhei began to lose consciousness, thinking that nothing had worked out. His thoughts were that he could not get rid of the demigods, protect Iris from betrayal, and could not prevent the death of Lucas. Shuhei said that he apologizes to Lucas for this if he can hear him, and finished thinking about how he lived a useless life, losing the last bits of life. Lucas, standing nearby in disembodied form, wanted to help Shuhei, but suddenly his consciousness moved back to the stone room. From the realization of the true state of the situation, which he had now, and which was after his death, Lucas looked down, losing his thoughts. Tears began to appear in Haruhiral's eyes, and Frey sat down at the table, laughing maniacally, and said only the words to him, without finishing the sentence. Lucas asked her if Iris was alive, but she didn't let him finish, and said that she was still alive, but not the same girl. But Frey didn't listen to her, and said that Shuhei's last word was an apology to him, and he shouldn't have said that. Lucas couldn't stop blaming himself as his shortcomings turned into his friend's apology before he died. Lucas clenched his fists at the feeling, and Haruhiral said that he blamed himself too much for this and should re-evaluate his role. Lucas stopped being angry at himself and told her that her forest would be a little noisy tonight, apologizing in advance. Haruhiral smiled in response to his words and said that a blessing would come with him, after which she clapped her hands, and Lucas was transported into Frey's body. Frey stood up from his place of meditation and felt that time had stopped in the Tree of the World, and noticed that he was still being watched. At this time, Ivan lost count of the number of times he did one-finger push-ups while doing a one-arm handstand during his workout. Ivan started the countdown again, and at that moment Frey returned from his meditation, saying that he had delayed this matter a little, and Ivan greeted him. Ivan told Frey via telepathy that he had conveyed his request, and it would come after the sun had completely set. Frey also thanked him telepathically, but also said that it was time for him to stop training, and Ivan became wary when he looked at him. Frey added that he was going to finish off Oideen tonight, and Ivan was surprised, but ended his training by saying that he would go wash himself. It was already deep night outside, and Frey sat in his room, meditating on the floor, improving the concentration of mana. But suddenly, a girl came into the room and began to say that she was suddenly called by a student of the self-proclaimed king of warrior magicians, and she did not believe him. It was Camilla, who said that she never expected to meet Frey in the High Elf village, and greeted him. Camilla sat down on the bed next to her, and Frey began to tell her his thoughts, and after listening to him, Camilla laughed, saying that it was Oideen after all. Frey said that he was also surprised that the apostle was a blood relative of the elf queen, but Camilla corrected him, saying that he was not blood. Camilla explained that Queen Snow was adopted because the elves did not have an heiress, and Oideen was not suitable because he was a man. Frey said that he understood everything, but was initially surprised that although all the queens belonged to the High Elves, Snow was not the same. Camilla said that Queen Snow belongs to a frame of ice elves who live in the snowy regions of the north. Frey replied that this story had many complications, but Camilla asked him when he was going to start acting. Frey said that everything would begin today, and Camilla asked that she needed to silence the observers assigned to Frey. Frey chuckled, saying that he understood him perfectly, but Camilla began to explain the reasons why this conclusion was too obvious. Freya was embarrassed by her insight, but Camilla stood up and said that she was also a guest for this town, so she could not cause much noise. If they were caught, she would say that Frey forced her, but Frey replied that no one would believe that he forced the panther himself to act. Frey thanked her, and Camilla asked him where Isabel was, because this time Camilla saw him alone, and he told her that Isabel was replacing him. Frey said that Isabel is now working as an instructor in the circle, but Camilla did not believe that such a sweet child was capable of this. Frey replied that perhaps now she was discovering new possibilities in herself, and Camilla said that it was time for her to leave. But before leaving, Camilla began to tell Frey to be careful, because Oidin has very good abilities as a summoner. Camilla said that Oidin lost his ability to magic because of the demigod, but did not lose it to summon, so he should be on his guard. Frey agreed with her, thinking that these were not just the abilities of a demigod, but of the apocalypse, and Oidin was very different from Luke's in strength. At this time, Oidin was sitting in his chambers, thinking about something complex, drinking tea that his maid was pouring. But suddenly, Oidin stood up from his chair and walked up to the maid, who did not understand anything, and pierced her right through with his hand, filled with magic. The maid managed to ask him why he did this before she withered away, and Oidin made a satisfied, maniacal grimace. However, a second later he woke up in the same place. The same maid was standing in front of him, asking if she could go already. Oidin realized that this was a vision, and realized that he could no longer contain the growing desire to kill due to the forces of the death apocalypse. At the same time, Shiax was walking alone through the city at night, when suddenly Oidin appeared behind her, exuding bloodlust but hiding it. Shiax turned around and asked what Mr. Oidin was doing on the street at this hour, but Oidin ignored her, coming closer, saying that he was glad to see her. Oidin said that she must have been tired from doing endless tasks when she arrived, but Shiax replied that she had brought people from outside with her. Oidin asked her about the matter with the necromancer, and Shiax grabbed her head, saying that they thought the necromancer was in their village, shocking Oidin. Thinking about killing her, Oidin said that in this case they would have huge problems, continuing to close the distance between them. He came too close to her and called her by name, almost touching her chin, and Shiax, not understanding anything, stood still. At that very moment, Ivan pushed Shiax away from Oidin, and she asked if he did this because she only left him grass for dinner. Shiax was in great pain from the fall, but Ivan told her to shut up, having a scar on her cheek, saying that if it weren't for Ivan, Shiax would be dead now. Shiax saw that behind Oidin was the high-level wind spirit Stonius, realizing that he was trying to attack her. Oidin said that he was surprised that the man Shiax brought turned out to be a warrior mage who killed all of his immortals. Ivan objected that Oidin was exceeding his rights, but he only said that he would not tell him anything, because now he would die anyway. Oidin decided that there was no point in holding back, but at that same moment, Ivan's fist almost flew at him. He managed to jump away. Ivan said that Oidin was not all right in his head, but he replied that Ivan did not dare talk to him like that. But Ivan said that Oidin was a mongrel of a demigod. Shiax stood in the midst of all this, and did not understand what was happening, but Oidin began to cast a spell, saying that the conversation would not work. Oidin summoned the immortals using the powers of the demigod, and golems began to emerge from the ground, giving Shiax awareness of the situation. These immortals were stronger than before, and Shiax wanted to ask Oidin why she did so. But a monster with a sword was already flying towards her. Ivan saved her by killing the undead from behind, and Shiax realized that there were too many immortals, and now their village was in danger. Ivan killed the monsters one by one, saying that he did not expect Oidin to reveal himself so quickly for the sake of killing. Ivan said that now Shiax will be a witness that Oidin is an apostle, because Frey told him to find evidence and then attack. Shiax realized that all this time, Ivan had been provoking Oidin on purpose, but she doubted that it was not because of his character. Oidin created new immortals, saying, "Aren't they cute?" But Ivan told him that they were very similar to their creator. He said that their disgusting faces, which make you want to vomit, are especially similar. They are just a copy of the owner, exactly the same. Oidin said that Ivan was becoming more and more impudent, apparently wanting to die faster, but suddenly a magic circle appeared under his feet. Oidin hit the very center of the spell and was thrown back, but when he woke up, he realized that the level of the attack was above 6 stars. At that moment, Frey appeared standing behind Oidin and said that he needed to watch his step more carefully, and Oidin screamed in shock. Ivan asked him why it was so late, but Frey replied that he was late in the toilet, and they began to humiliate Oidin together. Oidin listened as Frey said that his face was simply disgusting, and an elf couldn't look like that. Even Frey had a more beautiful face. Oidin became angry, saying that he would kill them both, and cut his hand, releasing blood onto the ground, from which a huge magic circle was formed. Ivan realized that this was a circle for summoning a demon, and said that Oidin had gone completely crazy if he signed a contract with a demon and contacted the demigod. Frey was surprised to see the circle, and the demon Asura, the demon of war, came out of it, and Frey said that he had not seen him for a very long time. Ivan destroyed almost all the immortals and told Shiax to leave and get out of the way, but she didn't know where to go. Ivan told her to go to that beauty, Queen Snow, and tell her what happened, asking for help, and she immediately left. Looking at the great Prince of Darkness Asura, Ivan said that they have big problems because he is not sure that he can cope with him. Asura realized that he was in the lands of the elves, and Oidin ordered him to kill these two, but Asura asked to silence this despicable elf. Asura said that even after entering into a contract with him due to his worthless abilities, Oidin must correct his attitude, otherwise he will die first. Asura decided that since the agreement was concluded, he would kill these two people, and said that he did not hate them, and apologized for this. Asura decided to crush them with his step, but suddenly Frey spoke, saying his full name in the demonic realm. Because of Frey's words, Asura missed him, but his attack broke the ground around them and killed the immortals nearby. Asura decided that the man with white hair knew him, so he used magic that transferred the person's soul to another dimension. Asura transported himself and Frey to the world of demons, where dead souls were flying everywhere, and stood before him majestically, in full height. Asura asked Frey who this man was, but Frey replied that he asked the question first, and Asura thought he was stupid. Asura said that Frey did not realize his situation, but he replied that he was in a hell of horrific deaths, where he could lose his soul due to the movement of Asura's finger. Asura laughed, saying that it was okay to hear this, because he would die knowing the reason, and swung his hammer at Frey with all his sweeping force. However, Frey moved to the second hammer in one of Asura's hands at the last moment, saying that he forgot the one who helped Asura rise to the top. Asura laughed, saying that he understood everything, but during this time he became a very fragile person, losing his strength. Trowman. Asura said that he heard about Lucas's death in the battle with the demigod lord, but Frey said that he did not have time to exchange unnecessary words. Asura listened to him and said that Frey came here just to collect a debt, but did not refuse, and added that he would fulfill any of his wishes. Frey replied that Asura entered into a contract with Iris Fizban, and he was interested in her real location because he must know for sure. Asura said he was sorry, but he didn't know anything other than that Iris Fizbane had teamed up with the demigod lord and was acting with him. Frey asked him again, but Asura said that he was confident in his words, because there were also Barbatos and Jepar, two princes of darkness. Asura said that while this was happening, she met with Lord Demigod and agreed on something with him, bringing the three of them. Asura said that she brought them to even things out, but she didn't seem inadequate, and apparently just changed her position. Frey asked when this happened, and learned that it was shortly after his death 4,000 years ago, and quite a lot of time had passed. Asura said that he remembers Iris talking about the man with golden eyes and white hair, Shuhei, that she needs to find his core. Frey realized that Iris was looking for the core of Anastasia, the perfect golem made by Shuhei, but Frey could not understand why Iris was doing this. Frey realized that he had too little time to restore the golem, and said that Asura's debt had been paid, and he was now free. Asura said that he expected a different request from Frey, but it didn't matter, because he would be killed when he left here. But Frey didn't understand what he was talking about. Asura reminded him that the person who entered into the contract with him ordered the death of Frey and his friend, and Frey remembered this. Frey stopped Asura, saying that he had not yet fully collected the debt from him, so he must enter into a contract with Frey.